How did the Narcos go from running the biggest drug operation in the world
Ya no queda nadie que se nos enfrente.
to watching their empire crumble to the ground? We're gonna find out. This is the entire story of Narcos. We'll try not to break too many laws. In the main series and its spin-off Narcos Mexico, the franchise covers drug lords in both Colombia and Mexico, along with the law enforcement efforts to catch them. But when Narcos was introduced to the world, it was the story of Pablo Escobar. Wagner Moura's award-winning performance as the Kingpin brought him to life in a way viewers could not resist. His rise and fall are the first saga the series covers. Our windows into law enforcement are Peña and Murphy, who are sort of the Forrest Gumps of Escobar's rise, present for all the crucial moments. The show's scope sprawls from peasants to presidents. Narcos' style creates authenticity. Primary sources like news clips and photos and heavy voiceover narration gives the series a documentary feel. This unique approach allows the story to zoom out and cut to different time periods. It's like a mix of Martin Scorsese's gangster movie Scarface and a true crime documentary. Though Narcos is a work of fiction, the broad strokes are true and are almost too insane to believe. Narcos is incredibly gory, with an impossibly high body count, yet is incredibly bingeable if you're into that kind of stuff. Let's get into the episodes and try not to get a runny nose. Our story begins over the skies of Medellin, Colombia. Our narrator, DEA agent Steve Murphy, sets the score. It's 1989, and they're conducting surveillance. We meet Steve for the first time at home with his wife and baby. Though Steve is the main character, he's drawn in broad strokes, a kind of typical agent to serve as an audience surrogate and American perspective into this world. He's called in to hunt down Poison, a high-ranking member of Escobar's cartel. Steve calls his partner Peña, played by a pre-super famed Pedro Pascal, who's at dinner with Colonel Carrillo, leader of Search Block, a hardcore division of the Colombian police. All three of these men are central to the efforts to bring down Escobar. They roll out to a bar where Poison and other hitmen party, and the police open fire inside. It's the perfect introduction to the morally gray world we're about to enter. Let's rewind back to the 70s. Murphy explains how President Nixon backed the campaign of Augusto Pinochet to seize power in Chile. He turns out to be a dictator and cracks down on Chile's cocaine industry. After a mass execution at a cocaine processing lab, one man survives, Cockroach. Since Chile is too hot, he needs to smuggle his product out of the country. Cockroach has the option to work with the big players of Colombian smuggling, the Ochoa brothers, Jose Rodriguez Gacha, the Mexican, or the one, the only...
Es Pablo Escobar.
¿Dónde está Felipe?
Felipe está detenido.
No, Felipe trabaja para mí.
Trabajaba para usted porque ahora va para la cárcel. ¿Cómo le parece?
We're introduced to Escobar taking himself out of a Colombian Special Forces stop. At this point, he already owns half of the police force and offers a deal for the officers, silver or lead. Make a deal to benefit or else. Escobar meets with Cockroach and realizes the amount of money to be made from smuggling coke. He has an even wider vision for the product, bringing it to the United States. Here's where Steve Murphy comes into the story. In 1979, he was a low-level DEA agent busting hippies for weed. He's a classic good old boy, and he gets dared to approach a woman in a bowling alley who turns out to be his future wife. Back to Escobar, he and his cousin and right-hand man Gustavo are given a step-by-step tour of the entire coke production process. And hey viewers, don't get any ideas. Using the smuggling route he had already developed, Escobar quickly makes mad money. Murphy's narration details many people involved in Escobar's orbit, including his mother, fiancé Tata, and the Lion, who is Escobar's go-to guy to smuggle coke to Miami. Escobar makes alliances with the Ochoas and Gacha to assist in his mass-scale operation. The effects of this scale of trafficking are present right away.
Before long, we were seizing 60 kilos of coke a day. We thought we were making a huge difference.
The DEA of the time, optimizing for dealing with weed, was ill-prepared to handle Escobar's sophistication. The drug trade affects Murphy and his wife personally as he has to shoot a teenager in the line of duty, and his wife, a nurse, treats a pregnant woman who died by swallowing a bag of coke to smuggle it. For all of its sleek editing and flashy action, Narcos does not shy away from the victims of the drug trade. Back in Medellin, Cockroach is upset he hasn't been paid out as much as Escobar, so he teams up with Colonel Carrillo, a search block officer, to seize product for sale on his own. Escobar goes to meet with Carrillo and gets arrested, but knows there will be no consequence and laughs through it the whole time. His mugshot is a famous image in its own right and comes back into play later. He ends up striking a deal with Carrillo and finds out that Cockroach betrayed him. Back in Miami, Murphy and his partner go undercover as buyers to some of Cockroach's dealers. When Escobar's men attempt to hit, killing Murphy's partner in the process, Murphy catches the hitman, but Escobar's cartel easily pays bail and gets him back on the streets. The bodies and dollars pile up until President Reagan's admin decides to start a new front in the war on drugs. Hey, I wonder how Cockroach is doing.
No, Pablo, no.
Something tells me he didn't survive, and that's why no one messes with Pablo Escobar. Due to the chaos in Miami streets, Murphy heads to Medellin to take on the cartel at the source, which brings us to the hit on Poison. Escobar reads about it in the paper and puts a price on Murphy's head. Episode 2, The Sword of Simón Bolívar, opens with Murphy and Connie on their flight to Colombia. Escobar is more profitable than ever with super labs popping up all over the country. After a brutal scene where Gacha shoots a dog that he sells to Pablo, Gustavo gives Pablo the lowdown on their problem: cash. They need to launder it.
Pues sos huevón, Pablo. Al Capone es un pésimo ejemplo. ¿Por qué? Pues porque Al Capone nunca tuvo tanto billete, Pablo.
That's right, the stacks are piling up to comic proportions. Pablo's team takes a couple of approaches, including filtering the revenue through his cab company, burying it, and sewing cash into furniture. His accountant, Blackbeard, keeps track of these hiding spots. Deep in the Colombian jungle, a group of communist guerrilla soldiers called M19, led by a history teacher named Ivan the Terrible, plot the kidnapping of the Ochoa brothers' sister, Maria. They're already known in Colombia for stealing the historic sword of Simón Bolívar from a museum. On the day they execute the kidnapping, Murphy and Connie arrive in Colombia and are immediately detained due to their cat not having proper immunity forms. But really, it's so the cartel can gather information on this incoming DEA agent. Meanwhile, Pablo has political ambitions.
Yeah, you heard that right. She just compared Pablo Escobar and Robin Hood.
He starts an affair with Valeria Velez, the reporter who first interviewed him. Meanwhile, Peña is already in Colombia undercover. He checks in with Helena, a worker who's informing on the cartel for him to provide for her child and get a US visa. Through her, he catches wind of a party where all the heads of Medellin will be in attendance. Murphy meets Peña for the first time and quickly catches up to speed on the US intelligence community, with the ambassador on top. She approves the new partners to attend the party. Murphy, Peña, and Carrillo run surveillance on the party. Inside, the Medellin cartel is formed with Pablo as their leader. After the party, Murphy and his crew wait for Peña's informant, but she's late. She trips up Gotcha's suspicions and unfortunately gets tortured. Peña heads out on his own to find Helena. He finds her brutalized by Escobar's men and kills a few of them in the process of saving her. In the jungle, Ivan the Terrible witnesses the aftermath of a slaughter of M19 and decides to release Maria Ochoa. Still, Pablo has too much fun killing M19 and mails photos of the bodies to newspapers to intimidate the entire nation. Ivan turns himself in, but instead of killing him, Pablo recruits him to his team, as if he were Nick Fury building an Avengers of the most dangerous people in Colombia. But Murphy, Peña, and Carrillo are more determined than ever to stop the gang. The episode ends on a horrifying note when Murphy and Connie return from a day out to their door wide open and their cat Puff has been killed. Is it bad if this makes me more sad than the human deaths so far? We're on to episode 3, The Men of Always. Murphy explains the murdered cat situation to Peña, who quickly determines that Murphy's identity was compromised during his detainment at the airport. He assures Steve that DEA agents are not typically ever killed in Colombia, due to the fallout from the previous murder of Agent Kiki Camarena, which was truly gnarly.
Kiki was captured and tortured. They skinned his legs, put a bullet in each limb, used an electric drill in his head till he died.
After that incident, Narcos did not kill DEA agents, and because of that boundary, Murphy and Peña need to pursue whoever killed Murphy's cat. Meanwhile, Pablo continues his affair with Valeria. He explains to her that he wants to run for Congress, and he would buy his way in if necessary. There's no way the public would accept a criminal to hold the highest political office. Right? Through Valeria, he meets Fernando Duque, a lawyer who worked for the New Liberals, a prominent political party in Colombia. Escobar bribes Duque, and the huge amount of cash sways the New Liberals into allowing Escobar to run for office. Murphy and Peña use bribery to their advantage too. They pay Suarez, an officer for the Colombian National Police, for information on who may have taken Murphy's info at the airport. Peña interrogates them.
Su gato estaba bajo de la jurisdicción del gobierno americano. Y matarlo es igual a matar a un perro policía.
Justice for Puff. The airport employees admit they passed the info on to a man named Poison. That's right, the same Poison whose deaths open the series. Meanwhile, Poison is sent by Escobar to deliver a bridge to Duque. Peña gets word of Poison moving and receives approval to set up a roadblock. Carrera warns Pablo, who warns Poison, and he gets away. Meanwhile, Pablo, with Valeria's support, runs a hugely popular campaign. It helps his team literally give away cash at campaign events. The new life in the public eye puts stress on his wife Tata and cousin Gus, who has strong words for Pablo just before his daughter's birth.
Nosotros somos bandidos.
Pablo explains his real reason for running: immunity. Sure, he says some mumbo-jumbo about the people, but power is undoubtedly Pablo's motivation. Pablo's associates, Gacha and the Ochoas, stress about their safety regarding Pablo's possible ascension, but they can't do anything except wait. Murphy and the DEA decide to let Pablo win the election without intervening to set up a greater humiliation. They bribe their way around town and receive info on Pablo's criminal record, and eventually find the photographer who took the mugshot from episode 1. Escobar's alternate, Ortega, wins the election and resigns so Pablo can take its place.
It's a country where dreams and reality are conflated. Where in their heads people fly as high as Icarus.
Mr. Escobar is going to Washington, Bogota. As Escobar takes his seat, he's quickly exposed by Minister Lara, who got the mugshot from Murphy earlier. He shows the mugshot to all of Congress, and Escobar, unable to escape his past as a drug dealer, walks out. The fallout isn't pretty. Escobar accuses Lara of fabricating the proof. Lara refuses to back down and goes after the Narcos' assets. Murphy tries to get him to wear a bulletproof vest, but he isn't convinced it's needed. Later, Pablo gives another public speech as he regains his influential footing. Unseen to the audience at the same time, he has Lara killed, a gunshot to the head. The vest wouldn't have even made a difference. Following Lara's death, Escobar is indicted, and even worse, Colombia strikes an extradition agreement with the US, which means much harsher prison conditions and sentences. But first, the agents need to catch him. Escobar responds by uniting the cartel again, and each leader takes a different approach to fighting the new threat. Escobar's biggest problem is a new honest politician, Luis Scalon, who's running for president. Escobar does what he does best, threatens and extorts. This time, judges with the threat being so intense they have to hide their faces. Even that doesn't work. Still, the CIA chooses to focus their resources on communism instead of the drug trade. Peña and Murphy get approved for $100,000 to fight Escobar, which is a drop in the bucket when the enemy is making billions. Peña uses these funds to bribe General Jaramillo to reassign Carrillo to head the Escobar case. Meanwhile, Alyssa, an M19 communist with direct ties to Ivan the Terrible, works undercover as a nurse alongside Connie. She begins prying for info on Steve. The agents need to locate Escobar, so Carrillo uses the CIA's time-trusted method, torture, this time on one of Escobar's men. Carrillo is seriously intimidating.
Yo sé que estás cagado del susto de que Pablo te mate. Pero yo también te voy a matar. Y bien despacito.
They roll out to find Escobar. Pablo gets tipped off and has to tell his family they need to leave as soon as possible. Despite the instability, Tata is loyal and she says she will always stand by her man. Gustavo, meanwhile, blames Pablo for raising the family's profile high enough to draw this level of heat. They get in a helicopter and take off well before the agents arrive. In the raid of Pablo's mansion, Murphy finds an address on a burnt piece of paper that leads to the investigation of Blackbeard and tons of corroborating evidence. To ensure local law enforcement doesn't tamper, they hide in the impermeable walls of the Colombian Supreme Court. The evidence leads Peña and Murphy to search for a man vital to Escobar's operation named McPickles. Through Suarez, Peña learns that McPickles began his career with the CIA as a pilot. Also, the photo of McPickles is immediately recognized by Murphy's colleagues as Barry Seal. Murphy and Peña stake out a brothel, which happens to be Peña's favorite, and easily apprehend Mr. Pickle. They threaten him with prosecution, and he gives them crucial evidence, a photo of Escobar loading cocaine onto a plane in Nicaragua.
Cause at the time, Nicaragua was governed by the communist Sandinistas, who were letting Escobar use their country as a landing strip for cocaine shipments to the US.
That's right, the communist connection will guarantee more resources for Murphy and Peña's operation. Peña doesn't want to present the evidence to the ambassador to ensure Seal's safety, but Murphy, desperate to get the funds, goes right to her. The photo of Escobar gets mass publicity. Reagan acknowledges it on TV. Barry Seal gets killed in a hit in Baton Rouge, and the fight against Escobar finally receives major funding. They raid labs all over Colombia and begin destroying coke at the source and get one of Escobar's men sentenced to over 100 years in a US jail. Pablo goes to Ivan the Terrible and gives him a special mission: destroy evidence in the Supreme Court. He agrees, but Alyssa is hesitant. She warns Connie and says she needs protection. Connie cooperates. Murphy rushes into action, but it's too late.
Financed by Escobar, the M19 guerrillas stormed the Palace of Justice and occupied the Supreme Court.
Half of Colombia's Supreme Court justices die in the assault and all the evidence is burned. Back at Murphy's house, he's furious about Alyssa, but Peña makes him see the bigger picture. She is no longer a threat, so it seems. Meanwhile, Escobar goes to pay out Ivan and gives him a special gift. I guess there's no honor among thieves. Episode 5, There Will Be a Future, opens with Golan and his speechwriter strategizing. They will go after and relentlessly pursue the extradition of Narcos. Meanwhile, Peña and Alyssa begin an affair. He puts her under his protection and says he will get her out of the country to safety. Murphy isn't into Peña's defense of Alyssa, but Peña reminds Murphy it was Connie who brought her into their lives and she could be liable. Meanwhile, the Escobar clan hides out in Panama. He offers to pay off Colombia's national debt for freedom, but they don't accept. How much money does this guy got? The other gangs in the cartel are still living in luxury, but miss their home in Colombia and blame Pablo for making the streets so hot. It's eventually Tata who convinces Pablo to go back. He makes a huge move and commissions a hit on Golan, who's killed at a rally. Gus is really mad, and even worse, Golan's cause isn't going away. At his funeral, his son puts up the speechwriter Dr. Cesar Gaviria to continue his father's anti-narco cause. Pablo and the cartel fly back, but their excitement is muted. Pablo insists that he will never leave Colombia again. Gaviria begins his campaign, and the public awaits his answer on whether he supports extradition. Escobar decides to try to influence him by sending Duque and Valeria.
Si Luis Carlos hubiera sido tan inteligente como lo es usted, tal vez nos hubiéramos evitado esa tragedia.
She is ice cold. Gaviria refuses to fold, but is definitely disturbed by the meeting. Meanwhile, Alyssa is denied safety for cooperating, so Peña intimidates an official into forging the papers. Back with Escobar, the mood is bleak. He gets paranoid and unhinged. With Gustavo's loyalty assured, Escobar says he's beginning to doubt Ochoa's faithfulness. The Narcos' pressure on Gaviria continues with them sending a letter, assuring peace in exchange for their freedom. Meanwhile, Carrillo is monitoring Pablo's phone calls. Carrillo takes charge on the hunt for Escobar, forming Search Block, a specialized department of the police who are insulated from corruption and trained with lethal force. The cartel, meanwhile, recruits child soldiers. Pablo quickly notices Search Block's activities and sends a rep to Carrillo to offer a $6 million bribe to give up the investigation. He refuses. Outside of Peña and Murphy's investigation, the US government leads its own inquiry into Colombia's communists, putting Alyssa on their radar. While Carrillo is out for dinner with his wife, the cartel makes a move. At Gaviria's press conference, he formally comes out publicly in support of extradition. So the cartel straps in for battle, and Carrillo makes the stakes clear as he calls Escobar directly to threaten him. This is gonna be insane. Episode 6, Explosivos, is one of the series' most action-packed installments. Violence is just a way of life in Colombia now, with brazen killings on the streets. Escobar pays Poison millions per dead cop. The law and the cartel are in an all-out war. Meanwhile, Murphy preps Alyssa with a new identity. Murphy and Peña are seriously going out on a limb to help her. Murphy distracts a CIA tail while Connie drives off with Alyssa. They get stopped at a roadblock and things get tense.
Papeles, por favor.
Documents.
But they succeed. Guess Connie learned a thing or two from her husband. Murphy can now focus on the main mission, ensuring Gaviria is safe. He meets with the Gaviria's campaign security and advises them to lie low. Gaviria is caught in the middle, wanting to take increased protection but does not want to give the impression of being too close to the Americans. The investigation continues with the agents shifting their focus to Gacha. He hides out in a heavily fortified mansion working closely with his son, who is just as scary as he is. Peña, Murphy, and Carrillo plot to take him out. Simultaneously, Murphy receives intelligence on a man known only as the Spaniard, who is photographed being picked up by Poison from the airport. Escobar hires the Spaniard for the price of 5,000 kilos for reasons unknown to the audience, but it's sure to be major. Speaking of Gaviria, he's really feeling the heat and sends his wife out of the country. Murphy hits the streets and gets evidence to allow him to access the highest level of classified evidence on the Spaniard. At Escobar's compound, it's business as usual with multiple affairs and hedonism. Back at Gacha's, even he is disturbed by his son's aggression when he sees him attempt to rape a maid. They prepare for what's to come. Meanwhile, Murphy digs deep into the Spaniard.
His real name is Ephraim Gonzalez. Celebrity now, for hire. Expensive, but the best.
He works for a terrorist organization that had assassinated multiple politicians in other countries. Murphy tries to warn Gaviria to hide instead of flying to Cali, but his reservations about receiving help from the Americans stand. Meanwhile, Pablo discovers Suarez is a rat and tells Poison to take him out. Meanwhile, Pablo recruits Jaime, a family man who is desperate for cash. Pablo immediately seduces him with gifts and sends Jaime on Gaviria's flight with a recording device in his suitcase. That's right, Pablo sends him unknowingly packing a bomb. Brutal. Elsewhere, Poison kills Suarez. Peña and Carrillo and the Search Block soldiers roll out in force to take out Gacha. It's a brutal battle and the series' best large-scale action sequence so far. Gacha shows up with the big guns. But he can't compete with Search Block's overwhelming force. He escapes with his son. Peña chases him in a helicopter. They fire on the truck and kill Gacha's son. Gacha, out of bullets, is still defiant. Carrillo leaves the call to take him alive to Peña, who decides to kill him, ending one of the most colorful and threatening bosses we've seen so far. Gaviria is about to board his flight when Murphy stops him from boarding, even if he doesn't have hard evidence that something will happen. Gaviria's head of security agrees to listen to Murphy this time, and thank God. The bombing demonstrates that Pablo will fight for power no matter the cost of innocent lives. Episode 7, You Will Cry Tears of Blood, picks up right in the aftermath. The entire world is shocked. The public immediately turns on Pablo. Peña and Carrillo go to Jaime's wife for info, but she remains loyal to the cartel. Murphy tells Peña it's time they take out Escobar. Meanwhile, Pablo has to go on the run again and says goodbye to his son.
Usted tiene que ser fuerte. Yo quiero que usted sea fuerte. Tiene que ser fuerte y nunca demostrar debilidad.
It's moments like this that really highlight Wagner Moura's performance and humanizes a man we've seen commit atrocities. He says bye to the rest of his family and is on the road again. On the way out, he instructs his men to kill Jaime's wife. Another consequence of the bombing is a landslide election in favor of Gaviria. This should be good for the US forces, but he insists he wants Colombia to handle it on their own terms. Despite being on the run, Pablo still conducts business this time with Pacho Herrera, one leader of the Cali Cartel who's going to be a major player from here on out. The Cali Cartel take more of a stealthy legal approach to drug dealing versus Pablo's brute force. Though they differ in methods, they both unite to get rid of extradition, but Pablo really doesn't like him and makes sure to threaten on the way out. Meanwhile, Murphy and Pena work with the CIA to track the Narcos' movements with satellite imagery. Pablo decides to offer to turn himself in for a reward, but Gaviria isn't interested in negotiating. Pablo and Gustavo instruct their men to target the families of politicians. Valentina uses her connection to Escobar to get the newspaper scoops, and a rival newscaster, who is also the daughter of Colombia's previous president, gets suspicious, so Valeria orders her kidnapped. Escobar sends Fernando Duque to negotiate again, this time with the hostages Escobar took as leverage, but it's no use, so Escobar begins killing the hostages. Even under pressure from the former president, Gaviria still resists. Pablo makes a video of the former president's daughter asking for a negotiation.
Presidente Gaviria, le pido que por lo menos considere iniciar las conversaciones con el señor Escobar.
Gaviria still refuses, but when the former president says Gaviria will lose donors and political support, he caves. Even though Gaviria intends to work with Escobar, he wants to catch him first, and he reauthorizes the Americans to help. Meanwhile, Poison kills Jaime's wife in front of her baby. Pena and Murphy go after him. Pena has the drop when one of Escobar's child soldiers hold him up. The hitmen get away. Murphy brings Jaime's baby home for the night. Meanwhile, Pablo sets his sights on the future.
O sea, que vos querés construir una cárcel.
Cárcel no, primo. Un castillo.
Episode 8, La Gran Mentira, starts with Pablo and Gustavo at their lowest, with barely any clothes on their back. Still, they are able to escape a raid by leaving their phone on a donkey. Say what you will about Pablo, but he is crafty. Steve and Connie are struggling to adapt to parenting. They have no long-term plan for what to do with the baby. Pablo threatens Diana, the former president's daughter. She doesn't cooperate and cuts deep instead.
Usted hubiera hecho cosas maravillosas. Eso es lo más triste.
She makes another video. Gaviria insists Escobar's demands are ridiculous, but pressure continues from the former president. But then, tragedy strikes. A search block raid claims an unfortunate victim, Diana. Diana's death triggers the people and Gaviria, wanting immediate peace above all else, so they resolve to work with Escobar. Escobar gets an update from Fernando that the government is coming to the table and will allow him to build his own prison with no official police around for miles, and tons of luxury amenities, which has to be one of the craziest real-life elements from a show full of them. As the prison is set to be built, he continues to negotiate for less of a sentence while he progresses his affair with Valeria. But bad news, she decides to spend less time with him so as to not damage her journalistic career. Pablo and Gustavo plot how the business will run with Pablo behind bars, and he reveals he knows about Gustavo's affair with Maria Ochoa. Meanwhile, Pablo tries to rob Escobar of influence bit by bit, notably by working with Valeria to get her out of Colombia. Pablo seems on top when the unthinkable happens. It makes Pablo realize rival cartels are an even larger problem than the police. Meanwhile, the Ochoa clan turn themselves in for an incredibly reduced sentence. In exchange, the cops will use Maria as bait to catch Gustavo. Carrillo and his men abduct Gustavo to an abandoned building where they try to torture information out of him. He doesn't crack, and the inevitable happens.
¡Sus familias! ¡Sus esposas están muertas! ¡Hijo de puta! ¡Están muertos!
Pablo receives the news of Gustavo's death at a family dinner, and we see him more emotional than ever before. Valeria visits their house and reveals the Ochoas gave Gustavo's location to the police, and that the Ochoas are working with the Cali Cartel. Escobar brings violence back to the streets, including a wild soccer massacre. Pablo buries Gustavo, and extradition is voted down in Colombia's Congress. Pablo turns himself into the Colombian authorities. Pena and Murphy show up for the ride. The episode ends with Murphy receiving the call revealing Poison's location, which leads to the shootout that opens the whole series. It sure plays differently with the context we have now. Morality in the war on drugs is all gray. Now that Pablo has been captured, the series must be winding down, right? Wrong. The penultimate episode of Season 1, La Cathedral, is the next phase of the story. Escobar is doing hard time. Not. Pablo can now operate with maximum protection, essentially inside a fortress. Despite being in jail, he's in the best position yet. He calls a hit on Cali Cartel members even as they approach a truce. Meanwhile, the Murphys care for Jaime's child and even plan on adopting her, but they're far from a happy family. Murphy never got over not catching Pablo and starts acting unstable, including shooting the tire of a cab driver during a road rage incident with his wife in the car. Pablo's hit on the Cali Cartel is brutal. Still, Pablo's men, Moncada and Galeano, try to get a $10 million plus payout from Pacho. Back with Carrillo, Search Block is being disbanded. Carrillo shows Pena and Murphy photos of the extravagance of Escobar's prison, and they're outraged. Back in prison, Escobar's men return to report on their negotiations with the Cali Cartel and think they got a good deal. But Pablo wants a higher payout. He also increases his war tax to $1 million a month from these two soldiers. Murphy, Pena, and the investigation determine that Pablo is using carrier pigeons to get around surveillance. They shoot down a bird and find a message referencing a delivery in a tunnel. They study the aerial photos but hit a wall until they receive an unlikely assist from Connie.
These aerials don't indicate a single tunnel on the whole mountainside.
Oh, the only thing I can see in all of them is this truck.
Murphy and Pena pressured the supply truck's driver into taking photos of the goings-on at La Cathedra. Once they receive the photos, which are proof of Escobar breaking his terms, they present them to Gaviria, who chooses to do nothing. Back in jail, Pablo has a huge birthday party, and Galeano's wife lets it slip that her husband complained about the war tax, raising Escobar's suspicions. His suspicions increase even more. When a stash of Blackbeard's buried cash is discovered, Pablo thinks Moncada and Galeano are stealing. Despite their loyalty, he's paranoid and makes a drastic decision. The once savvy Pablo is not thinking things through. The Cali Cartel tells Pena about the murder. Despite the evidence, none of the higher-ups will make a move. The partners set out to get Pablo to take action that no one can ignore. They leak the photos to the press. Season 1 finale Despegue starts with the immediate fallout from the photos. It's huge news, and the Colombian government announces they're opening an investigation. Pena and Murphy get suspended for going against the ambassador's wishes, but don't seem too upset. Pablo, on the other hand, knows there's trouble coming. Gaviria still has to tread carefully, as Pablo has the power to throw the country back into chaos, so he decides to tell Pablo that the government uncovered threats against his life and they have to transfer him to a new prison for protection. Murphy is ready to start treating his suspension like a vacation when…
Nothing goes down the way you think it will.
Oh no. Instead of storming the prison undercover, the Colombian army pulls up in broad daylight and allows Escobar's team to arm themselves and prep for a siege. Team Escobar tries to come up with a plan, but Pablo is hesitant and wants to set up a meeting with the president. Meanwhile, Pena goes back to the office to report Murphy's kidnapping. Gaviria sends his head of security, Sandoval, to talk to Escobar in person. He arrives on the scene, anticipating Escobar to be in custody. Sandoval goes inside alone to convince Escobar of the prison transfer. It doesn't work, and Sandoval starts to leave when…
Señor viceministro, ¿para qué va a caminar tanto hombre si tenemos un teléfono aquí en mi oficina?
That's right. Escobar just took another hostage. Pablo tells Sandoval that if the president withdraws the troops, peace will be maintained. He calls the president and keeps talking to Pablo when on the line, revealing he's a hostage. He stonewalls Escobar and tells him the president hung up. Gaviria orders special forces to storm La Cathedral as soon as possible. We finally see what happened with Murphy. Pacho of the Cali Cartel wanted to meet with him. He presents Murphy with evidence, making him complicit in Poison's hit and the innocents who died in the crossfire. He offers Murphy to work together to bring down Escobar once and for all. Murphy tells him that once Pablo is out, Pacho will be the agency's next target. The season wraps up with the raid on La Cathedra, and it's a seriously impressive action sequence. The raid seems successful with one monumental problem. Escobar is nowhere to be found. He escaped through a secretly constructed tunnel. The season ends on Connie telling Steve she wants to go home, and Steve replies they're already there. The drug war in Colombia is intertwined with the agent now. The Escobar conflict barrels towards its unforgettable conclusion. Season 2 concludes the Escobar saga, and it all starts with episode 1, Free at Last. Murphy recaps the complete failure of the raid on La Cathedral. Escobar walks out of prison right into the sights of the army. They seriously let him go, proving Escobar's grip on Colombia is still ironclad. Back with Murphy, Connie is furious at his job's instability. He gets the call from Pena that Escobar escaped and gets back to work. Pablo, meanwhile, has a teary reunion with his family and some alone time with Tata. The news of Escobar's escape is international news, and Gaviria employs the full might of the army, headed by Colonel Penzon. Meanwhile, Pablo plans his next moves. Even though he's on the run, he wants a public presence and to recruit more men. But he has a bigger issue. Judy, the widow of Moncada, the guy who Pablo killed in La Cathedra last season, and her family put out a hit on Pablo. Now, Pablo needs transportation, and one of his hitmen recruits Limon, a non-narco cab driver who transports prostitutes. We'll check in on them later. Murphy and Pena get to go through the wreckage of La Cathedra and even have a couple of laughs. Escobar again says goodbye to his kids and takes his place in the trunk of Limon's cab. Murphy and Pena visit Colonel Penzon next and receive a formal invitation to join Colombia in the manhunt for Escobar. Pablo, in cab's trunk, makes his way through Medellin, a territory still under his thumb. He gets to his destination, where he instructs one of his reps to move locations. On the way out, he's treated like a celebrity. Yeah, catching this guy is not going to be easy. Murphy and Pena receive a tip on Escobar's location. Meanwhile, the hit on Escobar goes wrong, and he kills the hitman. Meanwhile, Steve and Pena gear up for the search for La Kika on a tip from one of the prostitutes. When Steve receives a call that Connie is moving in with her sister for a while, their marriage is truly on the rocks. He rushes back to meet her at the airport, but it's too late. He also beats the hell out of a guy he caught doing coke in the airport bathroom. Peña heads out to hunt down La Kika, but he escapes. Damn, this is a rough episode for the partners. Pablo wants Gaviria to allow him to return to La Cathedral, so he has Fernando called to negotiate. But Gaviria has a trick up his sleeve.
Ofreciendo una recompensa de 1.4 millones de dólares para quien dé información y logremos capturarlo.
Yeah, all that loyalty Pablo bought just got another bidder. Episode 2, Cambalacha, opens with Escobar singing in the shower, intercut with La Kika indiscriminately shooting the workers at the brothel where he got ratted out. It's a stark contrast between Escobar's comfort and sheer brutality. Pablo is getting ready for an interview. He decides to use his tried and true method of PR to get back in Colombia's good graces. He offers to do time in any prison in Colombia as long as he's able to inspect it. The reporter asks him if he'll admit to his crimes, and Pablo's response is honestly really badass.
Su respuesta solo podría dársela a un sacerdote en un confesionario.
Gaviria is unmoved, and even worse for Escobar is the new president, George Bush. Not that one. This one. He's seeking the death penalty for drug kingpins. Bush appoints a new ambassador, Arthur Crosby, and a new DEA boss, Claudia Messina. These two new additions immediately start calling the shots. They're much more aggressive than the previous ambassador. Messina wants to remove Murphy from the case after his little airport brawl. Peña stands up for him, and Messina considers. All the while, Escobar plays video games with his son while he instructs his men to search for Judy, to no avail. Fernando, on Pablo's behalf, gets a meeting with Gustavo de Grief, the attorney general, who went rogue and is meeting against the president's wishes. On the streets of Medellin, Colonel Penzon's crackdown is in full effect. Peña and Murphy, who are quietly reinstated, man the phone lines for potential tips. Yeah, really helpful. Next, La Kika and Lamont buy a toilet. But it's not just any, it's a luxury model for Escobar. Then they head out to kill one of the prostitutes whom they believe could be the rat from the previous episode. They search the room and Lamont discovers her hiding, but lets her live. Phew. Back at Pablo's house, Tata pleads with him to flee Colombia, but he refuses. We'll see how that turns out. Messina meets with Murphy and lets him know who's boss. At least he has his job back. Shortly after the meeting, he and Peña get a tip on La Kika's toilet purchase. It matches the same model Escobar had in his private prison. They gear up for the raid. Behind the scenes, Colonel Penzon and Messina have a bit of a power struggle on the approach, but Messina makes sure the agents get their way. Pablo escapes with his family right before the troops arrive. At the new hiding spot, another mansion, Tata makes her case again to flee the country.
Nadie va a morir, Tata.
Pablo assures her all will be well. But his usual confidence seems notably dimmed. Pablo still has the power to cause serious mayhem in the streets. Episode 3, Our Man in Madrid, opens with a big power shift. After failing to capture Escobar, Pinzon resigns. Gaviria decides to bring back the search like MVP Carrillo. Cut back to Pablo, chilling as if the world isn't after him. Wait, where is he? In Judy's house, but she's gone. He's still intimidating her staff and recruiting them to his cause. Judy, meanwhile, is visiting Pacho of the Cali Cartel. Guess he's getting sick of Pablo too, and they welcome Gilberto, who's a banker on paper and leader of the Cali Cartel behind the scenes with his brother Felix. Compared to Escobar, the Cali Cartel operates in silence. They're major players and will step more into the spotlight next season. The brothers temper Judy's revenge-driven approach of destroying Pablo's labs, and they suggest cluing search blocking on it instead to squeeze Escobar for them. On the streets, Carrillo, Peña, and Murphy pick up signals from walkie-talkies to find Pablo's neighborhood spies. Carrillo marks his territory.
Was to show Pablo that the sheriff was back in town, and he did that the best way he could.
Carrillo takes some extreme action, including one of Pablo's child soldiers in front of his friends. Damn, that's dark. Meanwhile, back at Escobar's house, it's getting bleak with Tata realizing the government intends to kill Pablo instead of capturing him. Mark Namora plays these scenes with heart-wrenching authenticity. Later, Murphy confronts Carrillo about not being taken along on the raid, but Carrillo insists it's for his protection. Meanwhile, Pablo gets a visit from one of the boys who witnessed the murder, and he delivers a bullet from Carrillo to Pablo. Escobar asks him for one last favor. Peña meets with Don Berna, a former associate of the Medellin cartel who is now secretly working with Judy, and says he'll be offering the DEA tips to help in the hunt for Pablo. From there, Search Block raids a lab in another cool action scene. The team picks up a few of Pablo's men, including valued associate Gatto. Meanwhile, Pablo visits Valeria. He has her interview the child soldier to recount the story of Search Block's atrocity. This interview is intercut with Carrillo trying to get information by equally horrific means. It doesn't work. The episode ends with Steve, messy drunk, calling his wife while Peña hides out in a brothel. Everyone is clearly going down a long, dark road. Episode 4, The Good, the Bad, and the Dead, begins with a horrifying vision of Tata getting shot. Luckily, it's just a dream. Escobar's video premieres to muted response. The government denies the incident. Pablo sets out to write a letter while Carrillo keeps the pressure up on the streets. Pablo's letter doesn't get published in any paper. He's more isolated than ever, and the Cali Cartel plots from the shadows. In response to Pablo's employment of the communist M9, a deadly right-wing group partners with the Cali Cartel. Meanwhile, Lemon begins to feel guilty and visits Maritza, the prostitute from the first episode of the season, whom La Kika is after. She's hiding out on a farm. He advises her to work with the Americans for her own safety.
La oportunidad para que los gringos te den la visa y te puedas ir con tu hija.
Later, Lemon tells her Escobar's location in a meeting with his accountant. Peña goes out to a brothel when he's visited by Maritza, who tells him she knows the location of Escobar. She tips Peña off. The boys go to roll out, but Messina has both stayed back due to their recent track record of chaos. Carrillo rolls out with search block and walks straight into an ambush, meaning Lemon fed Maritza bad info. It's an incredibly intense scene that ends in a shocking death.
Es por mi primo, Gustavo.
That's right, Pablo smokes Carrillo with the bullet the kid brought back to him. Pablo has nice, quaint coffee with Tata. Wonder if the blood on his hands adds to the flavor. Gaveria's head of security decides to take the blame for the Carrillo tragedy, so there's a scapegoat. Pablo corners Maritza in a church, and it seems she's about to meet her end when he gives her a big sack of money instead, considering her actions led to Carrillo's death. She's shocked, but accepts it. The episode ends with Murphy having a teary reunion, and Peña is held responsible for the bad intel. He gets taken by Don Berna to meet none other than Judy Moncada. Episode 5, The Enemies of My Enemy, picks up right where the previous episode leaves off, with Peña meeting Moncada. She offers to work with him along with the Cali Cartel. They just need access to the government's vast surveillance resources. He's skeptical, so Judy offers him Maritza's location. He pays her a visit.
Yo no sabía, lo juro. Limón me dijo mentiras.
We'll check back with them later. Murphy meets with the widow of his partner who dies in season 1. Connie is slowly letting him back in, but still fears he's gonna, die. Meanwhile, Gaviria appoints Colonel Martinez, a longtime Colombian soldier, to head up the search block. He's hesitant, but Gaviria gets him to agree when he assigns Martinez's son, a graduate of the police academy, as a soldier in the violent division. Pablo, meanwhile, visits family. Seriously, Tata welcomes her cousin Carlos over, who also happens to be a major Miami smuggler for Escobar. They decide to bring back the Lion, the stylish smuggler from season 1. Back with Maritza, she sets up a meeting with Lemon, asking for help, but really, Peña used her to tell him. Clever. Even better, he follows them on to Velasco, an even bigger fish to Escobar's orbit. The Lion gets picked up from the airport, but not by whom he thinks. The Cali Alliance tries to get him to switch sides. Meanwhile, Escobar is living in a parody of domesticity, completely unaware of the danger facing his men. Later, Colonel Martinez explains to his son his concern, but still keeps him on search block. Peña gives Don Berna the location of Escobar's men, knowing full well what they were gonna do.
Cuando hay que entregar a los jefes.
These hits from Berna's crew increase the heat on the streets of Colombia even more. Pablo's domestic bliss is shattered once he receives word of the killings and Velasco's disappearance. The Escobar family is on the road yet again. The episode ends with a body publicly attributed to Los Pepes. We don't need to wait long to find out who they are. Episode 6, Los Pepes, opens with Pablo reminiscing on better times. In the present, his organization is in turmoil. His men are being targeted and he blames the Cali Cartel, but he needs evidence. Meanwhile, it's Christmas in Colombia. Check out these decorations. It's the work of Los Pepes, which is short for People Persecuted by Pablo Escobar, a vigilante army of citizens fighting Escobar. Despite being aligned with his cause, Gaviria has no intent to work with them due to their violent nature and forbids the DEA as well. Little does anyone in the feds know that Peña is supplying the Cali Cartel, who, of course, are behind Los Pepes, with information. Murphy gets suspicious when Los Pepes gets to one of Escobar's men before the DEA does. Next, the DEA gets intel on one of Pablo's most loyal soldiers, Blackie. Peña leaks it immediately. This has unfortunate consequences when Martinez's son stops one of Los Pepes at a checkpoint. Murphy and Peña defuse the situation. That was close. With Peña's conduct in the standoff, Murphy is aware he's working with them, and the series' gray morality comes to the surface again. Word of Judy's associates gets back to Pablo as being part of Los Pepes, and he wants to kill them recklessly. He enacts one of his most brazen hits yet at Gilberto's daughter's wedding. Somehow, they survive. But Gilberto is understandably horrified and wants Pablo gone yesterday. Pablo's mom sneaks out of the safe house to attend church and unknowingly gets followed on her way home. Pablo and his wife are pissed. She thinks they're overreacting when bullets start flying through the door. A huge shootout ensues and Pablo's family is safe, but for how long? He makes a bonfire of cash at his next safe house and tells Tata it's time for her and the kids to leave the country. Episode 7, Deutschland 93, opens with a window into an average Colombian family and their daily routine shattered by the sound of a distant bomb. Colombia is once again on fire, with bombs exploding in public spaces throughout the city. Pablo's mom and Tata fight, with the elder Escobar insisting she stay with her kids. Pablo is starting to look like he feels the impact of his options running out. It's not only his immediate family who's at risk. Duque is almost assassinated on a drive and an innocent girl dies in the crossfire. Meanwhile, Peña checks back in with Don Berna. He says Los Pepe's methods were a little much, but Berna convinces Peña to help him find Duque, who just left on a run with his son. Back at Pablo's, he sees his family off, this time for real. He arranged flights for them out of the country. No one is left in the safe house except Pablo himself. The government is aware of the flight, even though Escobar bought tickets to multiple destinations to throw them off. Gaviria and his team decide they need to keep his family in Colombia as leverage, and they send Murphy to intercept them. Let's hope he doesn't get in another bathroom brawl. He sees them getting on a flight to Germany and boards it as well. Why Germany?
Germany had some of the softest immigration standards in Europe. If you had a pulse, they tended to let you in.
Escobar is sad without his family and passes out, and later gets diagnosed with a bad case of stress. Can't imagine why. Meanwhile, Peña continues the search for Duque. He heads out without Don Berna's knowledge. Meanwhile, over in Germany, Murphy prevents Escobar's family from entering the country.
It would be setting up this house.
So, I worked with the DA, been with his family, and been tracking Pablo Escobar for a long goddamn time.
It works. They're detained and Pablo freaks out. Back with Peña, he finds Duque and offers protection in exchange for cooperation. He decides to think it over. Pablo, meanwhile, is desperate. He threatens to bomb Germany and even calls the Colombian Attorney General for help. It falls on deaf ears. Back with the Cali Cartel, they're mad at Peña for withholding info on Duque, and he gets a warning from CIA agent Brian, who looks like an aging hippie. Peña goes back to check on Duque and finds him and his son dead. Damn, that's dark. Escobar's family is sent back to Colombia and taken into custody by the Attorney General. Pablo wants a big bomb in a response and sends Blackie to do his bidding. The family from the episode's beginning returns for a bleak bookend in a hopeless episode. In Colombia, it can happen to anyone. Episode 8, Exit El Patron, has Pablo up against the wall again. He's freaking out about Los Pepes and the bomb increases ill favor across the country. The Cali Cartel chooses this moment to go to Miami and try to take over the market from Escobar. At the search block headquarters, our main boys' boss says he knows people in his team worked with Los Pepes, and Peña avoids eye contact. He has a heart-to-heart with Murphy.
If they come after you about what I've been doing, you protect yourself first. You didn't know anything.
Meanwhile, Tata, Pablo's mom, and her children are stuck at a hotel hosted by the government. Pablo is desperate for updates and sends Blackie to try to see them. He gets surrounded. La Kika discovers a big meeting of Pablo's rivals, and they make plans to crash it. Let's check over on Miami real quick. Pacha recruits the Lion and begins filling in the holes of Pablo's empire. Okay, back to Colombia. Valeria receives a call from Tata for help. Pablo meets with her before and sets her up with a walkie-talkie device that will allow Pablo to communicate without government surveillance. Murphy and Peña interrogate Blackie. They threaten to tie him to the bombing if he doesn't give them info on Pablo. He refuses, but does give up another, La Kika. They begin to track him. Valeria drops the device from Pablo off at Tata's hotel, and she calls Pablo.
Solo con escuchar tu voz estoy tranquila.
Wow, sometimes it's hard not to feel bad for the guy. On the Cali Cartel front, Miami is captured and Pacho has Lion killed immediately after. Not much of a thank you. Back at the hotel, Tata steps outside to see Valeria and her entire camera crew murdered for their association with Pablo. Tata calls her husband and it's clear he's shaken to the core. Still, he plans on rescuing her. He orders them to make preparations to attack the Cali headquarters. Search Block is able to get La Kika's location by calling Blackie's phone. The chase to catch him is thrilling. In the end, Escobar's most prolific killer is in police custody. Pablo receives the news, and it's clear he knows his reign can't last much longer. Murphy and Peña have La Kika call Pablo to lure him into capture, and Pablo knows there's something up with his boy. Next, he calls Tata and tells her he won't be able to make it to her hotel after all. He seems aware he'll never see her again. The search block is occupied in a shootout with Escobar's men as Limon drives him away somewhere safe. The question is, how long can he stay safe? Episode 9, Nuestra Finca, illuminates a vital new perspective on Escobar's past. Limon drops Pablo off at a farm and he's greeted by an old man holding a gun. He lowers it when he hears Pablo's voice. They know each other. This is Pablo's father. They haven't spoken in years, but he welcomes Pablo inside. No one hears from or sees Escobar for an entire month. During this time, Gaviria denounces Los Pepes formally, and the group claims to have disbanded. However, Judy and the Cali Cartel still work together behind the scenes, but Judy considers turning in Los Pepes to collect a reward. The Cali Cartel has plans of its own.
Oscar, Luis, a los carros que la patrona ya se va.
Don Berna calls Peña, who is trying to distance himself from Los Pepes. Peña sneaks out and meets Judy and Berna. She reports the assault, but he says he will only help her if she gives up the Cali Cartel. He turns her into an informant. Meanwhile, Tata starts to get concerned about Pablo due to his absence. She keeps calling, but he never picks up. Far away, Tata tries to call her at the same time, but the signal does not go through. All while, the Cali Cartel gets paid a visit by Don Berna. Back with Pablo, he's taken to tending the land with his dad, and the on-location photography looks seriously gorgeous here. Murphy receives a tip about Escobar's radio communication system from Martinez's son, while Peña lobbies the ambassador to formally offer Judy immunity in exchange for information. Back at Casa Escobar, it's TV time.
Se busca Pablo Escobar. Recompensa, 2.700 millones de pesos. Llame gratis de cualquier ciudad.
Even away from all civilization, Pablo can't escape his notoriety. During some downtime on the farm, Pablo offers to buy land near his father, but Dad blows him off. Ouch. Pablo confronts his father for being absent. His dad ends up dismissing him and tells Escobar he can't forgive him for being a murderer. It's a stunning character scene and communicates that at the heart of this international drug drama, there is just an insecure boy fighting with his dad. Pablo sends Limon to get cash for his next move. Back with Tata, the Attorney General tells her to let Escobar know surrendering is the only way to save himself. But come on, he's not gonna do that. Limon raids Maritza's home looking for the money they gave her, but she spent it. What comes next is truly brutal.
Yo te conozco. Quítame esa mierda.
Even the comparably innocent Limon can turn into a common killer like the rest of them. He returns to Pablo with some of the cash, only 6,000 instead of the expected 100K. Pablo begrudgingly accepts. Back with Judy, Don Berna drives her to the airport and says if she doesn't leave tonight, she'll be killed for ratting. She chooses life and flees. The episode ends with Pablo finally returning to Medellin and finally reaching Tata.
Pero ya estoy en casa, mi amor. Estoy en casa.
All is set up for an explosive finale. Season 2 ends with El Fincayo, which serves as a goodbye tour for Pablo. Let's get right into it. Pablo is the president, in his head at least. The reality is much bleaker. Pablo sits alone in a safe house while his family sings happy birthday over the phone. He's being monitored too by Martinez's son. Search Black is about to get a big break, but one person who won't be around to celebrate it is Peña. Due to his involvement in Los Pepes, he has to leave the country, and that ends the show's dynamic duo. They get in a bro hug and say goodbye.
Take care of yourself.
Escobar has no one around him now but Limon, and Search Block is closing in. Gaviria directly orders Search Block to execute Escobar if they find him. Martinez is a little apprehensive, but seems he will do whatever it takes. On Tata's end, the Attorney General forces her hand by ending protective custody. She pleads to Pablo to turn himself in, but he has to think about it. Search Block picks up the call and zeroes in until they bust down the door and... Better luck next time, feds. Martinez's son gets the blame. While Martinez's son tries to triangulate the signal, Escobar decides to go out. He's literally in the same corner store as the Search Block member, but they don't recognize him with his new beard. Damn, he's still got it. Pablo takes a seat on a park bench and has another fantasy where he is visited by Gustavo. Pablo attributes his downfall to when his cousin died. Gustavo reminds him of the truth. They are bandits. Pablo tells Tata for once and for all, he won't surrender. He launches into a plan of killing international press as soon as Search Block latches onto the signal. And just like that, after 2 long seasons, they found Pablo. The Search Block cars roll in again, and this time they're on target. Pablo and the small remainder of his crew fight the good fight, but the outcome quickly becomes inevitable. Murphy realizes when he looks at him that after all this build-up, Escobar is just a man. Strike Team poses for a photo next to Escobar's corpse, which becomes incredibly famous in real life. The players from Escobar to the government all process this seismic shift in a contemplative montage. Tata ends up going to Gilberto of the Cali Cartel and asks for help fleeing Colombia. He agrees on the condition that she gives Escobar's assets to him. She agrees. The season wraps up with Peña meeting the government's operations department. He assumes he's about to get in trouble, but instead they ask the questions that set up Season 3.
Agent Peña, how much do you know about the Cali Cartel?
Season 3, Episode 1, The Kingpin Strategy, starts with our first glimpse into Peña's personal life. He visits Texas and attends the wedding of a former fling. Peña is regarded as a hero, but he's still shaken by the daily brutality he witnessed. And just like that, he's back on a flight to Colombia. With Escobar gone, the Cali Cartel took over the entire coke business and operated in silence as the Gentlemen of Cali. We meet the four main big players. Pacho, we know him well by this point. Chepe Santa Cruz Landano, in charge of New York City and lives there. Miguel Rodriguez, number 2, and the number 1, Don Gilberto, the mastermind. It's a big day for the cartel. They're hosting a party that will bring the gentlemen to the same place at the same time. But first, a meeting with their security guards. Jorge, the head of security, is moving on from the cartel to start his own business. Meanwhile, Peña gets reacquainted with the law enforcement in Colombia. He learns a new president is taking over, and that this go-round would not be as crazy as the campaign against Escobar. Sure. The party kicks off, and Peña sends a spy in as a waiter. Their mole takes photos of the cartel using a hidden camera. It seems to be going well until...
Tienes que estar usando un equipo muy especial. Estás registrando algo con esta luz de mierda. ¿Y quién soy vos? Estoy a cargo de la seguridad de los hermanos Rodríguez.
Jorge nails him. Jorge knows everything about the waiter just by looking at him and says he needs to leave Cali. Back to the party. Gilberto makes a big announcement. He wants the Dons to turn themselves in and shift the cartel's earnings to legitimate business. It's a well-thought-out plan and everyone pretends to be excited, but the mood is mixed. Miguel finds out about Jorge's detection of the mole and immediately pressures him into staying with the cartel instead of resigning. Peña hears about how Cali intends to turn themselves in and begins negotiating with the government through Bill, the hippie CIA agent from previous seasons. They explain they just needed Peña to have a hero on board. Next, Peña's voiceover explains the hold the Cali Cartel has on the country.
They were on you. It was like the Soviet Union with nice weather. He even called it the Cali KGB.
Gilberto uses this surveillance to listen in on multiple associates' calls who want to break with Gilberto for going legit. Pacho dispatches himself to take down a man named Salazar from the North Valley Cartel. Pacho finds him out enjoying the nightlife. He plays nicely and has a somewhat surreal dance sequence with another man. Then, he does what he came for in one of the show's most brutal takedowns. They then dump the body in the river and leave it to the fishes. We end on Peña, who just quit smoking, lighting one up. New boss, same war. Episode 2, the Cali KGB, kicks off with some Cali Cartel soldiers disposing of hazardous gas in a tried-and-true method, emptying canisters into a sewer. Something tells me these guys don't care about the environment, but we'll check back on that later. Gilberto fields questions from the North Valley Cartel on Salazar's whereabouts. He's able to deflect and sends Pacho to Mexico, where the North Valley is based, to get a better deal. Peña has a bit of a hard time getting back into the flow. He catches up with Martinez and wants to ride with his son, but Martinez lays on the guilt trip.
The men who let loose Los Pepes in Colombia should have been arrested. Instead, they got promoted.
He tries to put it behind him. Meanwhile, the gas dumped at the beginning of the episode results in multiple deaths. Even worse, the media is onto it. Gilberto is pissed, but there's not much he can do but hope this doesn't blow the cartel's carefully manufactured cover. Peña meets the inexperienced agent Chris Feistel, who demands to be sent to Cali, but Peña, trying to be responsible, brushes him off. Jorge gets assigned to blackmail the building's safety inspector into not attributing the gas incident to Cali. Miguel's sociopathic son David, who wants to be in the cartel's business, starts overseeing this operation. Jorge is great at his job.
Si el malparido del inspector ese no dice lo que tiene que decir, nos vamos todos a la mierda. ¿Tú crees que se va a dar un pacto? ¿Tú crees que se va a dar una entrega? ¿Ah?
He starts digging for dirt on the inspector. It doesn't take long for Jorge to discover the inspector's wife is having an affair. Over in New York, Chepe tries to get a deal on ether, which the cartel uses for smuggling, when he hears about a rival gang of Dominicans who are receiving priority due to the fact that they don't intend on going out of business like Cali. Peña meets a journalist, Andrea Nunez, who alerts him to the gas incident. Speaking of that, Jorge goes to the inspector and shows him the evidence of his wife's infidelity. Back in New York, we see how Chepe solves the Dominican problem. He's the last man standing, and he didn't even have to get up. The episode ends with a gas incident being accounted for as an accident on TV by the compromised inspector. Peña responds in the only way he knows how, going back to Cali, and this time he's bringing Agent Chris Feistel. Episode 3, Follow the Money, has Pacho making the rounds in Mexico, which helps smuggle drugs from Colombia. He starts by reconnecting with his father and brother. Over at the DEA, Peña is visited by 2 senators. He's not impressed. Peña gives us a fascinating breakdown of money laundering.
The first stage of money laundering is called placement, and Cali had it down to an art, bringing workers from the comunas to the US, where their job was to buy money orders.
Essentially, through shell companies, dirty money becomes clean. The DEA just has to follow the right trail. Feistel and his partner Van Ness arrive in Colombia and are greeted by Captain Calderon, a guy who assures them he's totally, completely not corrupt. In the next scene, Miguel gets a call that the DEA is in Cali, and his source is, of course, Calderon. Peña is able to uncover a launderer for the Cali Cartel named Franklin Dorado, an international mystery man with ties all over the globe. He also has another meeting, or maybe it's a date, with Andrea. Meanwhile, Feistel and Van Ness get a ride around Cali with Calderon. Jorge drives an American lawyer Starkman, who's played by Wayne Knight, also known as Newman from Seinfeld, to a cartel meeting. Peña tails Dorado to the airport, but instead of rolling out to arrest him, Peña gets stuck entertaining the senators. Great. Meanwhile, Feistel and Van Ness are about to raid a building containing Cali's accountant, so Calderon calls Jorge, who rushes into action. The law arrives at the same time as Jorge, but he is quick and manages to stash the cash away. The feds still take some files. Back on Peña's helicopter tour, he takes the senators to a drug lab with a whole bunch of dead bodies, neatly displayed. Peña can tell this is unsubstantial when he could be out doing real work. Back with Pacho, he gets introspective with his brother on his upcoming fate as an ex-narco.
Excuse me, sir.
Feistel and Van Ness start poring over the files, but Calderon stonewalls them at every turn. They try to reach Peña, but he's still stuck wasting time with the senators. Bill lobbies for more funding, but Peña just doesn't have politics in his skill set. Shortly after the senators leave, the agents get into it.
Glad we're on the same page, Agent Peña. So the whole surrender plan is about fundraising.
At the airport, Van Ness recognizes one of the key men at the office building, Guillermo, who has a Chilean accent, which means he can be extradited. Jorge, meanwhile, tries to have a nice dinner out, but is revealed as a narco associate in front of his potential partners by Miguel's weird son. Feistel and Van Ness continue their tales from earlier and sight a big fish. Gilberto Rodriguez. Peña visits Martinez and sets up the next episode. Episode 4 Checkmate finds Peña and his new partners gearing up to take down Gilberto. The Don's main defining character trait is control. He schedules everything down to the minute, including his time with women in 3 different relationships. They begin the raid with one key rule.
Si alguno, el que sea, mata al capo, lo mato yo. No podemos repetir lo que pasó con Escobar. Lo quiero vivo.
One problem. Gilberto is nowhere to be found. Miguel is having an affair with Maria, the widow of Salazar, the guy whom Pacho killed in episode 1 of the season. He calls Jorge to retrieve Maria's baby from her mother-in-law. Over in Mexico, Pacho gets the lowdown on how effective moving coke from Mexico to the US is and gets an invite to join their cartel. He isn't sure what to do. Back on the hunt for Gilberto, a chicken truck carrying soldiers pulls up outside a mansion. This is really Gilberto's house. Peña's raid at the beginning was a setup to distract the mole in their organization. This time, Gilberto is home and hides immediately. Jorge has a hell of a time getting Maria's son back. Their grandma greets him with a shotgun. He gets the boy out of the house while the cartel brutally deals with grandma. Peña arrives at the correct house and Caldero is not having it. After missing the assault on Escobar, Peña is finally there for a historic drug bust. That's right, he got the biggest catch of them all, Don Gilberto. Calderon hotwires a police car and takes the hell off. Obvious much? The feds load Gilberto into the chicken truck and are on their way. There's an incredibly tense scene where Calderon and his men pull over a similar truck, thinking it contains Gilberto, only to reveal they were duped into picking up the wrong car. The feds arrive at the airport with Gilberto and are met by a welcoming committee of armed cops. Martinez isn't intimidated.
Lo que ustedes están haciendo hoy, lo que están haciendo ahora, eso los define para el resto de sus días.
His speech actually works and they let the team take Gilberto. Gilberto cooperates with the police but seems truly taken aback. Peña expects a warm reception from the new ambassador but is yelled at instead. The ambassador takes him to see Ernesto Samper, the new president of Colombia. The president's team is upset that the negotiations are nothing, but Samper is principled like Gaviria before him, and chooses to treat Gilberto as if he were any other citizen. In jail, Gilberto is visited by his son, who's a lawyer. They plan on fighting the case on an error in the warrant. The gentlemen of Cali meet, and Miguel is eager to dole out blame on his security team. We wrap up with Martinez resigning due to the upcoming danger to his life in retaliation for Gilberto's arrest. He went out as a hero and Peña is sorry to see him go. Episode 5 MRO shows us the Cali Cartel functions without Gilberto and, spoiler alert, it's not pretty. Gilberto tries his best to stay involved behind bars. He has Miguel take a meeting with Haino of the North Valley Cartel. Back at the DEA, it's so unsafe that Feistel can't leave base without an escort. Meanwhile, Peña is on his way to meet the president. Samper is looking for someone to trust and explains it could be difficult to keep Gilberto in custody, as someone testifying against him is unlikely. Jorge is sent to determine how Gilberto was captured. He starts listening in.
Más les vale que hagan algo rápido, o Cada hombre va a tener que protegerse a sí mismo.
Back in jail, Gilberto has a meeting with a government rep, but blows up on him. He's not used to being out of control on this level. Peña is doing some listening of his own, this time illegally wiretapping to hone in on Jurado's location. Miguel has his meeting with the North Valley Cartel boss, but it gets awkward when he sees Maria and her son, his killed soldier's widow, at Miguel's house. He seems to think he has the upper hand. Peña trails Jurado's wife to a bar and starts chatting her up. He tries to get her to talk, but she knows better. Back in Jorge's search, his associate blames Calderon for the massive security failure that allowed for Gilberto's capture. Jorge and his associate report to Miguel and his evil son David that the DEA never left Cali. They head out to apprehend Calderon. Peña visits Mrs. Jurado in her room and explains the stakes: cooperate or risk jail. She ends up saying she'll work with him. Back in jail, Gilberto's son Nicholas lays out the new deal: 3 years in jail and surrendering of all illegal assets. They get to keep their houses and cash. Hey, not bad, but Gilberto is pissed. Jurado talks to Cristina over the phone with Peña listening. And he speaks, throwing some German words in. Peña correctly figures this as a code and starts looking into it. Back in Mexico, Pacho gives his final answer on working with his family in Mexico, and ultimately it boils down to Cali accepting him as a gay man. Who would have thought this group of murderers could be so progressive? Jorge goes to a meeting with David and finds Calderon there as well. David doles out the cruelty. Damn, if this is how they treat long-term allies, it must be giving Jorge serious doubts. His reign of terror isn't over just yet. David also executes another security expert, Cordova, and his wife too. Don Miguel arrives next to Jorge. He will be taking over as head of security. He has no choice but to accept. Meanwhile, Peña is off to Curacao to find Jurado. Finally, Jorge drives to a secret location and makes a call.
Hello? The cartel knows where you are.
That's right, our boy is working with the DEA. Episode 6, Best Laid Plans, opens with a bang in New York City. Back in Colombia, Jorge meets Feistel and Van Ness. He offers testimony in exchange for safe passage to America. They want more than info, they want Miguel captured. Feistel is on board, but Van Ness is a little apprehensive. Peña gets acquainted with Curacao, which is a smuggler's paradise for the cartel. Jorge holds a meeting as head of security, but David immediately tries to undermine him. What's with that guy? Back in New York, Chepe watches news coverage of the explosion and hopes the Dominicans will take the fall when the reporter accurately mentions that Colombian narcos seized the lab earlier. They even identified Chepe as the leader. Back in Cali, Nicholas relays to Miguel that Gilberto has doubts about their accountant, but Miguel insists he's too valuable for them to get rid of. Miguel has big shoes to fill as well, as Gilberto typically presides over Cali's annual salsa festival, which is tonight. David and Jorge plan for the party and give Jorge even more control over his father's security.
Todo sale bien. Esto es fresco. Yo creo que podemos manejarlo bien.
No pressure or anything. Jorge uses his anti-phone tap device on a payphone and tells his new buddies in the DEA. Meanwhile in Curacao, Peña sights Jurado at a restaurant, and the chase is on. It ends with a massive public arrest, and the US begins to move on extradition. He now calls Pacho's contact in Mexico Amada, and it's confirmed. Mexico will only do business with the North Valley Cartel in the future. Wow, another huge loss for Cali. Meanwhile, Peña offers a deal to Jurado for him and his wife, but he won't do anything until he sees Cristina. She comes home to police raiding her house and knows the score. Back in New York, Chepe meets with the journalist who broke the news and tries to intimidate him into talking. When that doesn't work, he negotiates with the lead. Salsa Festival is underway, with all seemingly going well. Miguel gives a speech, but he's a lot less articulate and charming than Gustavo. Jorge runs into one of the DEA agents and says he sighted their men trying to blend in. One huge issue, the DEA didn't send any additional men. 2 scenes of violence happen concurrently. Pacho's family gets assaulted by the North Valley Cartel, while North Valley also leads an assault on the Salsa Festival. It's intense, well-edited, and extremely violent. Luckily, or unluckily depending on where you're sitting, all the big players make it out. Peña warns Cristina, who heads the embassy, but is taken by a Cali Cartel Cesario on the way. Peña goes to the jail holding Jurado and hears from the cartel's lawyer, remember Newman from Seinfeld, who says Cristina's deal with the DEA is off. With Miguel, Jorge is in better graces than ever and gets put personally in charge of the Don's security, allowing him to know his location at all times. That's gonna be good for the DEA. Next, Gilberto tells Miguel to keep a cool head and not start a war with the North Valley, but they disagree. The episode ends with Jorge finally telling his wife wife what's up, and she thinks he's insane. Episode 7, Sensalida, opens with Colombian dealers at war once again. That's right, Miguel didn't take Alberto's advice, and the Cali Cartel and North Valley begin the cycle of escalation. The North Cartel does lots of things differently than Cali.
Let's just say they didn't give a shit about public relations.
Meanwhile, Feistel, Van Ness, and Jorge strategize. Jorge advises them to bring their entire team to raid Miguel's apartment through an entrance he will supervise. This plan reaches the higher-ups, and Penny requests the cooperation of the only not-corrupt cop left, General Serrano. Due to the stakes of the operation, Colombia's minister is willing to work with the DEA only if this is a guaranteed success. Failure will result in a difficult road ahead for Pena. We get a quick lowdown on Serrano's backstory.
He joined the force, expecting to find other like-minded men, but instead he found corruption. And where he could, he rooted it out.
Pena and Serrano plan a way to circumvent the warrant process, which would tip off the cartel. They meet with Serrano's men and gear up. Before the raid, Jorge comes home to his wife, leaving. He tells her the plan straight up. She resents him for ever getting involved in the cartel. Serrano sends Pena to take on Miguel while stipulating he will arrest Miguel when the press arrives. Jorge goes to work and gets a stunning request from Miguel. He wants Jorge to tap Gilberto's phone in prison. Jorge makes the take his post so the raid can commence, but Miguel invites him to dinner instead. Oh no, this is not going to be good. Law enforcement rolls out, and Jorge is on high alert that the feds will trip off his security system. He stonewalls a report by turning off a walkie-talkie that would have tipped Miguel off. He can't stall for long. Miguel hears the helicopter and knows something is up. Pena gets a warrant signed on the spot, and they begin searching for Miguel, who's nowhere to be seen. Pena and the two rookie agents ask Jorge where Miguel's at, but he truly has no idea. The DEA searched far and wide in the building for Miguel. Feistel finds a crucial piece of evidence, the cartel's entire ledger. Meanwhile, David gets word of the raid and freaks out. He goes to the Attorney General of Colombia and makes him go to Miguel's apartment. Penny looks into another apartment with the same floor plan as Miguel. He notices that Miguel's bathroom is slightly smaller to hide a crawl space. They drill. Just as they're extracting Miguel, the Attorney General arrives and shuts down the investigation for improper procedure. Damn! The DEA boys are sent out of Cali, and without a bust, Jorge has no assurances anymore. The episode wraps up with Gilberto calling Miguel again and urging him to surrender. But Miguel reveals it was never his intention to begin with. Jorge assembles his gun, getting locked and loaded for what's next. Episode 8, Convivir, opens with Cristina being led deep into the jungle by the cartel. No way this ends well for her. Meanwhile, Miguel is furious about almost being caught. He of course considers the security team and blames the man who was guarding the door, Enrique. David calls Jorge and asks him to find Enrique. Back with Pena, the DEA is ready to shut down the case, but the strength of evidence from the ledger and Gerardo in custody is too good a lead to give up. Next, Pena hits up his old friend Don Berna to find Cristina. He shows Pena a photo of Cristina captive and cuts a deal to help get her, as long as he's kept off the DEA's list. Instead of bringing Enrique to David, Jorge hides him and instructs him to call no one. Jorge reports he has no idea of Enrique's location, but David and Miguel are super suspicious.
Usted no explica cómo es que la DEA sabía dónde yo estaba, ¿me entendés?
Sí, señor.
He demands that Jorge find Enrique. Over with Pena, Berna allies him with FARC, Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, whose whole business is returning kidnapped people. Pena flies out with them. Behind bars, Gilberto instructs Nicholas to reach Gerardo for him. David sets out to find Enrique and sends Jorge to meet with Navegante, a terrifying hitman to find Palomari, the Cali accountant. The operation to retrieve Cristina gears up, but Pena, who must be having flashbacks of Los Pepes, has a concern for Don Berna.
¿Dónde? No quiero que se arme una carnicería. Escúchame, Peña. Nos crea la muchacha.
He doesn't have much of a choice but to go along with them. Jorge and Navegante arrive at Palomari's apartment, and it's eerily quiet. Navegante leaves Jorge to find the accountant on his own while he goes off on a date. Jorge calls his surveillance network for a lead on Palomari. Nothing. But he gets word that Enrique called his brother, and David knows his exact location. Over with Pena, the operation begins under the cover of night. At the same time, Jorge goes to meet with David and finds an ambush waiting. Enrique blames Jorge, and it doesn't look good until a DEA pager planted by Jorge begins vibrating on Enrique. He did what he had to save his life. Meanwhile, they find Cristina.
¡Quieto!
Stay still.
Da un paso más y la...
That was intense. Jorge visits his wife and breaks down completely. After the day he's had, who can blame him? Being an informant must be incredibly stressful. Jorge calls his DEA contacts and says they need to take Miguel out now or he's dead. Hey, I wonder how Salido is doing in prison. This is not going to be good. The penultimate episode of the Colombia series, Todos los Hombres del Presidente, is another incredibly intense showdown. It starts with Peña meeting with the ambassador, who is shutting down the investigation at 5 p.m. today. He okayed Jorge's extraction, but Peña wants to wait to try and nab Miguel first. Peña goes to the general for support. He's hesitant to cooperate due to their last failure, but gives in. They plot a takedown with Jorge. Meanwhile, David, not convinced of Enrique's guilt, continues looking for the mole. Jorge preps his wife to leave as soon as the operation ends and gives her a gift.
Mi amor. Paola, cógela.
Who said romance is dead? Back with the gentleman of Cali, Miguel meets with Chepe and Pacho and tells him he tapped Gilberto's phone. He gives each of the men assignments to rebuild operations in their region. Miguel gets word of the DEA in Cali. Jorge suggests a safe spot and they depart. Jorge tips off the DEA as they depart. They leaked wrong information and are confident Botero, the Minister of Defense in Colombia, is in cahoots with the cartel. Peña tells all to the journalists from earlier in the season. She's putting together a massive story on the cartel and ties an art collector who is laundering money to Bolero's campaign. Miguel packs up to go and tells Jorge he will even invest in his security business once his cartel contract is over. Yeah, good luck with that. David obsessively reviews footage and records of the days surrounding Enrique's capture and makes a shocking discovery. He calls Miguel immediately with the intel that Jorge was lying. Jorge is waiting outside for Miguel when he gets called back inside. Faisal, who watches from afar, knows something is up. They call Peña and get authorization to roll in now. Once Jorge is back in the apartment, Miguel confronts him immediately and the DEA moves in. At the same time, someone knocks on Jorge's wife's door, which turns out to be the DEA, but it's not long until there's a second knock. It's another crosscut sequence designed for maximum suspense. In the end, David and his men run, Jorge is saved just in time, and Miguel gets away. Or so it seems. Serrano is the only one who finally places Don Miguel under arrest. Peña brings his findings on Colombia's corrupt foreign minister to the ambassador. It turns out the ambassador knew the whole time. The campaign contributions were deals cut with the cartel as part of their surrender. Behind bars, Gilberto and Miguel embrace. Gilberto remains hopeful that Pacho and Chepe will agree to a surrender. Cut back to Pacho. He says he's going to turn himself in, but one more thing. Chepe gets arrested the old-fashioned way. Despite the case's progress, it's a door ending as the Colombian government's corruption seems too deep to root out. The finale of Season 3, going back to Cali, opens with Pacho taking care of that one more thing.
Como medio hombre, medio.
His men massacre everyone in the house, and just like that, a key player in the North Valley has been hit. After his detour, he surrenders, and all of the godfathers of Cali are behind bars. It's far from the hard time they deserve, though. Unfortunately, without the testimony of their accountant Palomari, the godfathers will not stay locked up permanently. Peña recruits Jorge to locate him. David is searching for Palomari too. The accountant meets secretly with a cartel lawyer who advises him to get out of town. But he wants to stay and negotiate. We shall see how that turns out. Peña, Jorge, Faisal, and Van Ness secretly head out to find Palomari. They get right to work.
Métase. Métase, hijo de puta.
The agents begin to squeeze the leads they have on the streets, which leads to one of the men calling Palomari's spouse, allowing Jorge to listen in and find her location. Maria goes back to the North Valley boss Heynow for protection. Meanwhile, the DEA uses cunning and technology for info. David applies brute force.
¿Dónde putas está Palomari, marica? ¿Ah? ¿No me oíste?
Peña gets to Palomari first and lays down the stakes. He can relocate to the United States in exchange for decoding the cartel ledger. One problem. Navigante intercepts Jorge outside, but Jorge, badass as always, gets the upper hand. David gets the news and is furious. He heads out, but... the North Valley guns him down before he can make a move. RIP to one of the show's most evil characters. You won't be missed. Palomari and his wife are safely flown out, and it's not long before he's testifying in court. Peña is still unsatisfied with the government's deals with the cartel and goes public. It causes mass unrest throughout Colombia. The ambassador fires Peña. Too late. He already quit. Peña explains the outcome for the leaders. Chepe escaped from jail and is eventually killed by one of the guerrillas he previously worked with. Pacho is slain in prison from the North Valley, and Gilberto and Miguel are extradited to the US to serve life in jail. Jorge unfortunately had to plead guilty to felony conspiracy in the US and disappears into federal witness protection, working at a KFC. Wonder if this is in the same mall where Saul Goodman is hiding out. The series ends with Peña back where he started, with his family in Texas. He's offered a new assignment, Mexico, but he's through. Another job for another agent. Agents we're gonna hear about right now. The spin-off series Narcos Mexico is a prequel that was originally supposed to be season 4 of the main show, but it turned into a series all of its own. The show covers ground that runs dangerously close to the present and even resulted in the real-life murder of a location scout, allegedly by the cartel, but it's still technically unsolved. New country comes with a new narrator, DEA agent Walt Breslin. He lays out the stakes, and remember, this is a new Narcos series. So we're about to hit you with tons of names, places, and politics. He explains that this story has no ending as it is ongoing. A man is dragged with a hood over his head by sicarios. He's revealed to be Kiki Camareno, the first DEA agent killed by the cartel, referenced all the way back in season 1. Breslin explains that the majority of plants that go into drug processing come from Sinaloa, one of 3 cities of the Golden Triangle of drug production, where the majority of our story will take place. The Mexican government sends the army to take over the farms and reap the profits for themselves. We see it in action as the army chases a farmer into a church. They have the building surrounded when Felix Gallardo pulls up. Gallardo, played by the always great Diego Luna, is a cop. He goes into the church and takes the farmer away on the pretense of jail, but really he's rescuing him. Next, he goes to a hiding spot where his wife Maria and kids are holed up.
Ya te dije, por más que quieras, si quieres que le pares, le paro.
Es por eso que jamás podría pedir.
They're a good team. Next, we meet Kiki. He's currently working undercover. He's a loose cannon and makes a drug dealer point a gun at his head to prove he's not a cop. Like Felix, he's definitely not an average cop. Due to his antics, the bust is successful. Walt gives us some important context. Unlike their status when Narco begins, the DEA is a new, hardly established organization that isn't taken seriously. Kiki gets his next assignment to Guadalajara, Mexico. Back in Sinaloa, Felix brings the farmer to his bosses, including the Lion of Sinaloa. They want to rebuild the burned fields, but Felix suggests a more radical plan. Move the business to Guadalajara. He isn't a trafficker, but they're willing to give him a shot and bring along his friends Rafa and Cuco. Kiki arrives and the drug war is on.
Bienvenido a México.
Both the DEA and the newest trafficker arrive in Guadalajara at the same time. Felix wants to meet with the Don, but gets his henchman Hernan Naranjo instead. He tries to cut a deal, but Naranjo blatantly makes fun of his offer, so Felix shoots him. Kiki is eager to get started in the field, but the commander puts him on boring data gathering. Meanwhile, Felix's actions get him taken directly to the region's boss, El Azul. Naranjo's brother wants to kill Felix for murdering his brother. Azul shoots him instead and decides to work with Felix to obtain specialty-grown, seedless, high-quality weed from Sinaloa. Kiki gets a lowdown on local law enforcement, and it's clear that the CIA are the big dogs. The players are in place, now let's see who falls down. Episode 2, The Plaza System, opens with Kiki conducting a raid, but it's too easy, definitely seems set up. With Felix, the marijuana plants are not growing well in the new harsh desert climate. Breslin hops back in for a history lesson to explain the Plaza System.
Anyone looking to do business in a territory had to cut in the Plaza boss, pay him a piso or a toll. And if they chose not to, trust me,
it was a highly individualistic system of violent lone wolves. Felix wants to bring them together as a cartel. Kiki visits the doctor with his pregnant wife and ends up spying on a narco with her in the car. This guy is reckless, but seems competent. Meanwhile, Felix begins visiting dons across Mexico, one by one, including Amado, the Lord of the Slides, who you might recognize from Season 3, to recruit them to what will become the cartel. Felix also loops in corrupt Mexican law enforcement, including the DFS, a federal security team with brutal tactics and a hand in the drug trade. Kiki presents his findings on the traffickers and is immediately dismissed. Like Peña before him, he finds a mountain of bureaucracy in the way of getting anything done. Eventually, Kiki gets his raids and finds nothing. Back in the desert, Rafa digs for water. Felix has a meeting with Falcon, arranged through Isabella, a socialite who will become hugely involved as we go on. Falcon gives his consent even if he thinks Felix's idea is insane. The Falcon gang hosts a hedonistic, raging party that contrasts with the earthy Sinaloans. Back in the desert, Rafa starts throwing grenades. He seems to have gone mad. Nope, he was just saving the business. Felix has the cartel assembled. He makes sure to pay tribute to his boss, Pedro Aviles, and Donna Velez blows up the deal by refusing to work with Donna Costa, and all other bosses drop out. Felix is sent back to Sinaloa, his dream of a united Mexican drug trade a failure. Until he's stopped on the way back by the DFS and Don Nito, the leader of the Guadalajara trade. Also, they're driven by a man who calls himself El Chapo, who we're gonna learn a whole lot about later, if you don't already know. They want to proceed with the plan, so Felix does what he has to. With Aviles out of the way, Felix can ascend to Don status. Kiki physically sees the cartel's combined forces roll out and knows he's onto something. Episode 3, El Padrino, begins with boys from Sinaloa riding bikes around a mansion. The cartel has resulted in serious cash coming in for these former farmers. At the DEA office, Kiki is still insistent on his theory of a unified Mexican narcotic organization. He's getting seriously fed up with the US law enforcement's inaction. The cartel itself is running profitably with very little violence, just as Felix envisioned. The problem is that power struggles were inevitable, and DFS boss, Commander Nava, thinks he's not getting paid enough, so he orders a hit on some Sinaloa traffickers. The Arellano Felix brothers had a cousin killed in this slaughter and want revenge. Felix has to think of a solution to placate all parties and keep the cartel united. Later, Felix gets pulled over by cops, Nava specifically. He puts Felix in place and doesn't regret killing Arellano Felix's cousin at all. This guy is not pleasant. Felix meets with the governor of Sinaloa and asks for advice on the Nava situation. Felix actually used to be his bodyguard, but now they're on almost equal footing. He advises Felix to allow the brothers to take revenge, and the DFS has to just deal with it. But Kiki is determined to prove his theory, so he stakes out. He recklessly poses as a field worker to gather evidence. Meanwhile, Rafa watches Scarface. Let's hope he doesn't get too many ideas. Kiki tells his wife he's out the next day. She tells him to be careful when he's off to work. They put a black bag over his head so he doesn't see the location and buses him and others to the cartel's massive marijuana farm.
¿Qué tan grande es este lugar? Nunca he visto dónde acaba.
He also catches sight of El Azul. Before he knows it, he's back on the bus. Interesting first day on the job. It's the governor's wedding, and everyone is dressed to the nines. American law enforcement observes from afar, but nothing like the surveillance operations we've seen in seasons past. Felix confronts Nava. He gave him a lighter envelope to bait him into sending men again, but this time the Arellano Felix brothers ambush them. Felix tells Nava he has to deal or endanger the partnership that's making them a lot of money. The ceremony goes off well, and the governor gives him a sincere toast, but in private, turns out to be a douche and tries to bill Felix for the advice earlier. Meanwhile, Kiki arrives just in time for his wife's birth. The next day at the office, Kiki presents his evidence, and combined with the wedding surveillance, they can prove a cartel conspiracy with El Padrino, Felix at the top. Episode 4, Rafa, opens with Rafa dressed as a revolutionary. He kidnaps his girlfriend Sofia from a rich family, but she's in on it. This is their way to stay together in spite of her disapproving family. Let's see how that pans out. Meanwhile, the DEA operation on Felix gets stonewalled by the DFS, so they shift focus to the smaller players like Rafa. Kiki encounters issues with the higher-ups who are content with more raids but don't see the big picture. Sofia's father, an influential political leader, quickly finds out the identity of Rafa and wants Felix to do something. Rafa can't be bothered.
Entonces traguen plomo, hijo de puta!
Felix is really mad at him for endangering what they just built. Rafa is blind in love but agrees to turn himself in when, last minute, Felix tells him to pack a bag. The Mexican government isn't playing either. They send their most badass lawman, Caladroni, on the case. Kiki briefs him on their findings on the cartel. This seems like the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Felix comes home to find Nava sitting with his wife. It's clearly a threat. Nava tells Felix he will oversee taking Rafa in but wants Felix's cooperation. The DEA makes moves too.
Yeah, subtle. We had every address you gave us, Agent Camarena. All of Rafa's houses.
Rafa arrives at a safe house with Don Nito, who chokes him for putting Felix in danger. All he has to do now is lie low, but law enforcement is persistent and Calderoni is not afraid to bust some skulls, shocking Kiki. Kiki realizes he can get his friend at the phone company to tap Rafa's calls to determine a location. Felix and Amato fly weapons to Nicaragua for Nava in exchange for helping with Rafa. When they land, he gets a black bag over his head and is taken away. Meanwhile, Rafa gets seriously messed up on coke and calls Sofia. Kiki gets his guy to phone tap, even if it's not strictly speaking legal. Felix gets tortured by the DFS, teaching him a lesson for saying no. Just as Kiki is about to enter the safe house, the operation gets called off by the higher-ups in Mexico City. Better luck next time, Kiki. On Felix's way out, he notices a massive coke smuggling operation overseen by the DFS. Maybe there's more money in that industry than he thought. Felix confronts Nava, who set him up as a power move.
Ay, Félix. La próxima vez que te diga que tingues, tú nomás preguntas, ¿por cuánto tiempo?
This guy is the worst. Episode 5, The Colombian Connection, reunites us with some old friends. Felix begins putting feelers out to the Colombians to begin handling the new product, cocaine. At the same time, Kiki's wife gets harassed by cops and her husband is not having it. He and his buddies plan to force Mexico's hand for a warrant. Kiki goes back to his wiretap guy, but he's skeptical because the cops came after his nephew for previous cooperation. Rafa is now out of hiding and back in the lap of luxury. Don Nito catches Felix up that Amado and Rafa got in a conflict earlier that day, and he feels like a wary dad. The DEA eventually gets their wiretaps set up and can finally see the full picture.
And what they discovered was staggering. The sheer size, payroll for field workers, drivers, cops, enforcers, nearly 100 code names for politicians.
Kiki tells his wife in bed he's set on catching the man behind the curtain, Miguel Felix. Felix heads to Colombia and begins to pitch a smuggling operation to none other than Don Miguel, Chepe, and Pacho.
Anda, cierra el puto trato. Quiero llevármela a bailar.
They make Felix cover the expenses, but they end up striking a deal. Back in Guadalajara, Don Falcon sabotages one of Rafa's weed routes, not long before he boils over and does something really stupid. As Felix is leaving Colombia, he gets shoved into a car by Blackie. That's right, he's going to meet Pablo Escobar. He asks why Felix made a deal with Cali over him. He's honestly a little offended. Eventually, Pablo strikes a deal. Felix will go half-half between his crew and Cali. Meanwhile, Kiki sneaks into Felix's office and escapes with the intel just in time. Phew, that was close. Not everyone is happy. Rafa thinks going outside the weed business is a bad move. Kiki's report still doesn't get the authorization needed to make this a truly effective investigation. Kiki's wiretap guy faces consequences, and Kiki visits the carnage.
No, espera. No, ¿qué haces? No! I swear to God, Bill, if you don't take those... Get down!
There's gonna need to be some serious changes for his mission to get accomplished. Episode 6, La Última Frontera, opens with Kiki trying to stop a shipment as it goes out. He succeeds, halting a plane in its tracks and discovers not drugs, but financial documents. Felix seeks a meeting with Mr. X, a prominent government official whose name is censored by the show. Instead of immediately signing off on Felix's actions, he takes his time making a decision, frustrating the Kingpin. Nava is annoyed at Felix for cutting a coke deal without him, but decides to wait it out before taking drastic action. Meanwhile, Kiki picks up Thomas, an American who's assisting the cartel with moving money. They pressure him into informing. Rafa heads to Tijuana to get even more cops in the cartel's pocket. They get right to work. Nito, Rafa, and their men burn down one of Falcon's storage units. Thomas calls Felix and tells him about the DEA raid on financial documents while the DEA listens the whole time. Nito is on the phone with Felix when they hear choppers in the air. It isn't long before chaos erupts. Just as Falcon decides to cut a deal with Felix, the Mexican authorities pull up and kill him on Felix's behalf. Kiki and the DEA make a plan to arrest Kiki when he crosses the border, as soon as he reaches American soil. It's a tense moment, but right as Felix is crossing, Mr. X calls him to accept his deal and warns him about the DEA on the other side of the border.
Guys?
Better luck next time, Kiki. The episode ends with Felix's cocaine shipment arriving. Things are about to heat up even more. Episode 7, Jefe de Jefes, Spanish for boss of bosses and another nickname for Felix, opens when a scuffle outside a movie theater ends in violence. Who the heck are these guys?
Logra reconocer al joven.
Sí, es mi hijo.
Oh man, this is not gonna end well. Meanwhile, Geneva, Kiki's wife, looks for a home in San Diego, a harsh contrast to the turmoil of Tijuana next door. At the DEA's office, Kiki gets hyperfixated on nailing Felix, as shown by his little dart freakout. With cocaine in his trade, Felix and his cartel are making a ridiculous amount of money. They create a sophisticated shipping operation like we saw the Colombian cartels do in the previous seasons, and surprise, surprise, Nava wants a higher payout. At home, Maria begins to get sick of always playing second fiddle to Felix, especially considering how involved she was back in Sinaloa. Felix consoles a hysterical Don Nito, but quickly switches to business. He's concerned about Nava and Juarez's production. Felix suggests incorporating Amado, Nito's nephew, into the business more. Meanwhile, Rafa is indulging in the nightlife a little too much. Yikes, that is the wrong guy to point a gun at. Felix rages at him the next day, but Rafa is dismissive. Rafa doesn't understand that Felix is the boss now and acts entitled. Still, Felix wants to work with him. Meanwhile, Kiki continues staking out cartel members with his family, this time secretly when his son is on lunch. He sees Felix and tries to confront him on the street, but the Kingpin couldn't care less. To make matters worse for Felix, Maria is done. She's going back to Sinaloa to live with her mom. Even worse, Felix had an affair and got his partner pregnant. They reconcile in a moment of passion. Maria makes it clear he needs to move to Sinaloa. Kiki is heading out for the night, and Micah knows he's going to be putting himself in danger. Like Maria, she wants her husband to leave Guadalajara and make a home in a more comfortable setting. Nito visits his son's killer and offers him atonement, but the second they're out of the house, he puts his driver to finish the job. Felix gathers all the bosses for another cartel group meeting and makes some changes. He sends Amado to Juarez and clearly lays out that the future is cocaine. On this last announcement, Rafa walks out, and the crazy part is other bosses agree with him. Felix lets loose.
Ese trato lo hice yo. Nadie más. Quien no esté de acuerdo con eso, ahorita se puede ir a la verga.
On the DEA side, Kiki threatens to leak photos to the press if he doesn't get authorization for more surveillance. He gets approval, but the assignment will keep him in Mexico even longer. The episode ends with another seemingly random act of violence. Rafa has a bender and ends the night at a Tijuana seafood joint. He runs into 2 American tourists who he assumes are DEA, and things escalate quickly. Felix is not going to be happy. Meanwhile, Felix loses it on Nava and beats him to death. Well, that's one way to deal with him. Episode 8, Just Say No, takes its name from a famous phrase uttered by Nancy Reagan as an anti-drug campaign. Kiki knows a thing or two about anti-drug campaigns too. He leads DEA men, along with Mexican military, to storm a massive weed farm. Rafa is attacked but manages to barely escape in time. Kiki's seizure is the largest in US history, amounting to $2.5 billion of product. Felix is concerned with the recent turmoil, and to make it worse, Rafa blames him. Felix returns the anger due to Rafa's recent tourist run. Honestly, this relationship seems damaged beyond repair. Elsewhere in the operation, Amado's takeover of Juarez isn't efficient enough, and the corrupt government is beginning to get skeptical of Felix. Kiki and his men celebrate and pack up when they suggest that staying in the field is a better path than doing admin in San Diego. Seems like it's definitely Kiki's strength. Meanwhile, Acosta begins scheming with Amado to get a cut of Felix's coke money. They visit 2 mules who claim a load of coke fell out of a truck. A likely story. Rafa really struggles with quitting drugs. He has a surreal vision where he follows Sofia through a dream space. In reality, he's freaking out fully clothed in a bathtub. Cuco gives him nose candy and, like that, he's back on the stuff. Felix meets with Mr. X again and asks to potentially move on the DEA. But X makes clear his notoriety is too intense and they are not to hurt any American. Meanwhile, Amado and Acosta find the secret stash they searched for earlier. Kiki hears that despite his big bust, the government doesn't have much interest in keeping the investigation going. Then, the unthinkable happens. Kiki gets black-bagged by Rafa against Miguel's wishes. Miguel and Kiki finally come face to face. We all know how this is gonna end. Not so fast. Episode 9, Lope de Vega, opens with Kiki in bed next to his wife, but that's a fake out too. She calls his colleague Jaime to ask his location, but no word. Felix is livid at Rafa and correctly assumes his life is in immediate danger. He has to disappear immediately. Kiki gets tortured, and his colleague Butch starts investigating his disappearance. Micah demands more information, but the problem is no one knows anything. The DEA gets to work finding an honest attorney in Guadalajara, and it takes a long time. The bureaucratic process slows the search significantly. Even with intense torture, Kiki keeps a cool head and advises another captive.
If you lie to them, and you tell them what they want to hear, and they find out that you're lying.
Micah advances his cause as much as she can. Mexican authorities finally decide to cooperate. They see Rafa at the airport and roll out. It's an immediate showdown, but he's allowed to go as he claims he was heading on vacation with his girlfriend. Sure. News of Kiki's capture begins to make international news. Felix is planning the next move when he needs to evacuate. The feds raid his office, but it's a really close call. Kiki's torture gets more and more brutal. Butch and the DEA boys get word that Rafa is in Costa Rica. For a man on the run, he's living it up. The DEA and Caladroni move in, and this time they're not playing.
Está carnal. ¿Dónde está el gringo?
They keep him on adrenaline to keep him alive to potentially talk. The DEA finds his location and heads over as fast as they can. The season 1 finale, Leyenda, shows the effects of Kiki's kidnapping, causing mass delays on the border. The DEA rolls out, but they're too late. Jaime breaks the news to Micah and she breaks down. In a meeting, DEA agents get the gory details. They're rattled and outraged. But that's not the only brazen act of Felix's cartel. They also hit a DFS agent in broad daylight. Felix and Don Nito have a discussion about the good old days and where they might hide out next. Felix goes to the governor and asks to hide out at his place for a month. He says yes, for $500,000, and only allows him to stay 1 week instead of a month. Meanwhile, the DEA, now headed by Jaime, gets a tip that Felix could be hiding out in Sinaloa, but they need more. Jaime recruits Caladroni, who gets to work.
Regreso mañana y todavía no tienes nada que contarme. Va a pasar lo mismo.
While Don Nito has a hedonistic beach party, we then cut back to Felix, who's coughing up blood. It seems symbolic. This once relatively peaceful man is now a butcher. Felix gets set up with a new idea and receives tapes of Kiki's interrogation. He calls the governor and says he'll be off tomorrow. The governor calls Caladroni next and rats on Felix. His forces descend on the house, and in typical Narcos fashion, it's a bloodbath. Caladroni finds himself with Felix, who tries to cut a deal. The tapes of Kiki's interrogation, where he names multiple corrupt Mexican government officials, to allow his escape. Caladroni lowers his shotgun. The feds come for Don Nito next. He can't be bothered to take his headphones off or stop smoking as his men get mowed down. Nito and Rafa are captured. The cartel regroups without Felix, now with one of the Arellano Felix brothers on top. But then Felix crashed the reorganization meeting with the overwhelming force of the Mexican authorities on his side. He's not going anywhere. Next, we flash back to Kiki tied up, confronted directly by Felix. Kiki offers Felix help for when the rest of the cartel flips on him. Felix leaves the room and gives a lethal order. Back in the present, the DEA launches Operation Leyenda, which translates to Operation Legend. And Felix mails the governor a present. In the show's final moments, we finally meet our narrator, Walt Breslin, the DEA agent who will head up the effort to avenge Kiki. Season 2 starts with Selva El Tigre, and it starts with a trip to the doctor.
Dr. Delgado? Eh?
Ooh, don't think there's a cure for that. It's not the cartel, but the DEA seeking information. This is the doctor who assisted in the torture of Kiki Camarena. In an interrogation, Breslin reveals himself as a harsh, driven force to be reckoned with. Meanwhile, Felix and Maria celebrate his 40th birthday. He's back in a life of luxury with a new baby too. Next, Ruben Acre, Mr. X's nephew, comes by and says his uncle won't attend the birthday party. Felix isn't impressed. He's still paying the government off to operate smoothly. Time for another history lesson. In the aftermath of a massive earthquake, the Mexican people lose faith in the long-dominant political party. Could this signal a turn in the cartel's future? We shall see. Far and wide across Mexico, familiar faces of the cartel depart for Felix's birthday. Breslin deals with some bureaucratic roadblocks like Kiki before him, but is unable to clear them much quicker.
Move on, Verdine.
Quietly.
Yes, sir.
It's definitely a whole new ballgame. Felix's party is the typical narco rager, but Felix reflects alone in his room. He finally comes downstairs and makes the rounds, including meeting the new governor. The DEA outlines their plan to catch Commander Verdin, a corrupt member of the Mexican police, using toy cars.
Verdine continues north onto a quiet street with visibility and one-way traffic, where, he comes to a stop.
Back at the party, dealers mingle, including the soon-to-be famous El Chapo. Next, Felix catches up with Amado, who wants some updates for Juarez, but Felix is cold to his former friend. In true Scarface fashion, Felix is gifted a tiger. Please keep this from PETA. Meanwhile, Breslin stakes out for Verdin. Back at the party, Benjamin Arellano Felix asks Felix for a raise, but the Stone Cold boss puts him in his place. Pacho from the Cali Cartel also attends the party, and he brought the psycho Navegante. Felix meets with Pacho and asks why the payout for smuggling Cali's coke is so slow. Pacho says money is harder to move than drug bricks. It's the beginning of friction between these two drug trafficking giants. Back with the DEA, they begin trailing Verdin. Of course, the operation erupts in violence.
Getting you hit? 2 shooters, both sides!
In the end, Breslin nabs Verdin, but a civilian witnesses the secret mission. They take down his ID and hope for the best. Back at the party, Felix observes all factions of his organization from a balcony. It sure is lonely at the top. Episode 2, Alea Lacta Est, starts with Verdin's interrogation by Breslin, but he is not swayed. He holds more cards than the DEA. Verdin says he will be found by his loyalists before he gives the Fed a single iota of information. Meanwhile, Felix attends a meeting with Don Juan, the leader of Gulf Cartel. Breslin does whatever it takes to get Verdin to talk.
Who called you in? Who was in charge?
Don Juan shows Felix the river where he came up smuggling alcohol, then gradually more profitable products until reaching his current trade, opium. Felix pitches a collaboration, but Don Juan is skeptical. Amato tracks Acosta, who has disappeared. Next, we cut to Tijuana, where Benjamin Arellano, Felix, and his sister Anadina decide if they should work with an American dealer played by Quavo of the rap group Migos. He introduces an even more deadly and profitable product to the show.
Venga, venga, venga. You hear that? That's why it's called crack.
Later, Amato finds Acosta holed up with an American girl. He's not as interested in the game anymore. In the background of all this cartel reorganizing, the torture campaign to get Verdun continues, but he sure is persistent.
But I love my country. And I know that you are trying to hurt it.
One of the agents, Kenny, ends up shooting Verdun. Breslin outlines the stakes. The gunshot wound will kill him in 2 hours, talk or die. Meanwhile, Felix converses with Juan's nephew, who dashes Felix's hopes of their organization getting into coke. Verdun finally gives them a name, Arce. The DEA doesn't know how big they just struck it. Back with Felix, he finally entices Don Juan by promising security and independence from the Colombian cartels. Meanwhile, Isabella has been striking deals around Felix, but Benjamin denies her. The DEA drops Verdun, who isn't gonna make it, and Felix returns to Sinaloa. Episode 3, Ruben's Uno Arce, begins with Felix having a surreal dream sequence where a sick woman who resembles Kiki speaks ominously and tells him to run. It's just the start of an episode full of bad vibes. Back in reality, Acosta wakes Amato up, and they raid a hospital. Breslin catches up his superior on Ruben Zuna Arce, the nephew of Mr. X. Ruben is in line for leadership in the Mexican government. Breslin gets the go-ahead to move on Ruben's location. Felix gets word of Verdun summons Calderoni, who's now in his pocket, to try and slow the Americans. Meanwhile, the Amato Acosta show is turning into a buddy comedy.
Avisa, pendejo. Se mancharon las botitas.
Amato tries to make Acosta agree that if he helps the old man with these killings, he will return to Juarez, but Acosta stops short of promising. Back over with Felix, he's beginning to encounter friction with Benjamin, who requests his assistance. He actually gives in and allows a new tax for Benjamin's benefit. Ruben Arce indulges heavily in his hideout with drugs and women. Next, his security points out a mysterious car on their property. He thinks Americans are prepping for an assault and freaks out. Felix takes a meeting with Ruben's uncle.
Yo le voy a pedir, digo de forma respetuosa, que ya se ponga a hacer su trabajo.
Cuida tus palabras. Estás hablando con el próximo presidente de México.
It doesn't move the needle, and the elder Arce advises Felix to go into hiding instead of kidnapping foreign nationals. Ruben makes a furious phone call, and DEA controls the switchboard. Ruben gets through to what appears to be one of Felix's receptionists, who says the Americans know where he is. Ruben decides to run. He gets his guys to stop one of the American cars and cruises to the airport. But it's all part of the plan. Ruben lands to a surprising welcoming committee.
Hey, bud. Looks like they're waiting for you down there.
Over with Acosta, he gets into a shootout and comes out on top, but it's pretty beat by the end. The episode ends with Felix calling his children, who are already in bed. It's revealed that Maria instructed the maid not to put him through. Episode 4, The Big Dig, opens with a flashback where Breslin discovers his brother's dead body in a parking lot. Definitely makes sense why he's so driven against the cartel. Felix visits his old friend Don Nito in prison. It's not exactly a joyful reunion.
Pero en realidad no tienes a nadie. Porque preferiste una pinche bola de abogados y de políticos bulburosos de mierda en lugar de tus amigos.
Nito advises Felix to turn himself in. He sees Rafa on the way out as well, who gives him a death glare. Via news report, we get some important historical context with the Iran-Contra conflict beginning to play out. With a DEA, Ruben sings like a bird. He reveals his uncle, the Minister of Defense, whose name is censored with a bleep implying he's still a player in real life, is in with the cartel. Isabella continues her campaign of trafficker unity, next recruiting Anadina, but she doesn't have it all in censor packing. Felix meets with his gun smuggler to get in touch with the CIA. Felix heads back to Nicaragua. Back in Mexico, Chapo begins building a tunnel under the border. Breslin is still involved in his partner's family. He takes his son out fishing and gives his widow money. Felix meets with his CIA contact, who's none other than Bill.
You really the sheets with this whole Camarena thing. Made yourself dinner talk in D.C.
Bill is ready to turn him in, but when he discovers Felix isn't offering a bribe, but instead a more efficient smuggling route for the Contras, well, Bill is suddenly interested. Ruben takes the stand for a grand jury, but he contradicts himself from his interview and now denies ever even knowing Felix. They decide to use Ruben as a source and to keep building their case. But then a higher-up comes in, who says the investigation can be shut down with Ruben as the big win. It's clearly a result of the deal Bill just brokered with Felix. This really pisses Breslin off. Over Over with Amato, he's still trying to get Acosta to run to Juarez. The American girl he's shacked up with talks with Amato individually and says Acosta isn't going anywhere. Amato insists he will not be protected from Felix if Acosta doesn't do what he says. Breslin meets with Calderoni and secretly points a gun at him under the table. Calderoni explains he feels bad about letting Felix escape, but he didn't have much of a choice. He says that he will assist Breslin in building the case against Felix, but Wall isn't sure if he can trust him. Meanwhile, Enadina corners Isabella and tells her she's got a deal, and Chapo finally finishes the tunnel. Episode 5, AFO, starts with Calderoni catching the DEA up on the intra-cartel dynamics we've seen play out over the last few episodes. They want Calderoni to testify, but he's not going to do that. Breslin wants to get one more big win before he's forced to go home. Meanwhile, Enadina sets up a plan where cleaning people who go into America for work will become drug mules, as she bought the company where they'll be cleaning.
Nosotras hemos empleado 700. Esos son 350 libras por día. ¿Alguna otra pregunta?
Felix visits Amato. They're going to Panama together. He puts together a meeting with the Colombians and the Gulf Cartel. He's also giving Amato a big promotion. Head of Transportation, overseeing the drug plane network. Meanwhile, the DEA boys follow a cocaine truck shipment. In Panama, we see a familiar face.
¿Qué hubo, pues? Ya va a acabar.
Ya casi, señor.
That's right, Jorge from Season 3. Felix meets with Pacho, who says he struck a deal with the Gulf Cartel independent of Felix. In turn, Felix requests a higher volume of shipments. Ultimately, the Colombians, Big Time Felix, and Don Juan doesn't show for the meeting. Amato thinks the volume Felix requested is too much, and if they don't deliver, their lives could be on the line. Felix calls Don Juan, who says Felix's high profile does not gel with his way of doing business, making the Colombians a safer partner. Felix doesn't take it well.
¡Deja de hablar de mis putos socios, carajo! Te gusta mucho Roma, ¿verdad? Te voy a crucificar, pinche gordo y feto, pinche payaso de mierda!
Yikes. Breslin and his boys begin checking out the building where the truck arrives. They look inside, but it's nowhere to be found. Little do they know, they need to look underground. One of the agents notices a ventilation fan turn on and gets suspicious. Night falls, and the agents sneak inside the building and get tipped off by music playing underground. Next, they see someone straight up walk out of the floor. Breslin brings his findings to Calderoni, who says the tunnels were made without Felix's knowledge, and the best way to destroy his empire was to divide it by further stoking these tensions. So they roll out and raid the tunnel. Felix meets with Calodroni, who gives him some intel. I guess he's playing both sides. Calodroni also lets him know Don Juan has the next president of Mexico in his pocket, giving him a serious political leg up. The episode ends with a shocking attempt on Felix's life. Episode 6, El Dedazo, has Felix trying to address the political situation as soon as possible. He meets with a new PRI rep who's unmoved by Felix's plea. If bribery doesn't work, they need to find another way. On the streets, Felix's gang begins to retaliate for the attempted hit in the last episode.
Game over.
Felix wants immediate peace. Over on the DEA side, Calodroni updates them on Felix's Panama excursion. The new alliance of Isabella and Enadina makes a deal with Haynau to get a cocaine supply of their own, without the involvement of Benjamin or Felix. In the middle of this turmoil, Felix visits his kids at school but can only look from afar. You have to wonder if this was all worth it for him. At a plane auction, the DEA attends to get eyes on Amato. Breslin hops back on the narration mic to explain the PRI's platform. They intend to privatize most federally controlled industries across Mexico. Later that night, Breslin conducts a secret operation to wire Amato's new plane. Benjamin and Felix finally get on the phone. One huge issue. Benjamin says he doesn't want peace with the Tijuana cartel. He strong-arms Felix into helping him send a message to Tijuana. Meanwhile, Breslin and the boys track the plane and make a huge discovery.
This gives us everything.
Felix meets with a rep from Sinaloa and tells him the man they sent to Tijuana will not be returning, implying he's gonna die, on Benjamin's behalf. Felix goes to Maria's house and makes a case for their relationship one more time, but she shuts him down once and for all.
No quiero que te me acerques ni a mí, ni a mis hijos. ¿Me escuchaste bien? ¿Entendiste? No quiero que te vuelvas a aparecer por aquí, ni que vuelvas a seguirlos a la escuela.
The episode ends with Miguel lost in the crowd of the new anti-narco presidential candidate's supporters. Episode 7, Truth and Reconciliation, starts with Felix intentionally running into Maria at a cafe. Not creepy or anything. She gets word of the hit Felix commissioned in the last episode and is completely appalled. Breslin gets a call informing him of a new potential informant, but he's a little busy at his son's baseball game. Felix meets with Mr. X as a last-ditch effort to gain some kind of political advantage. He says the new populist candidate Cardenas will jail Felix as soon as he's elected. Felix has a call with the PRI candidate, who is still convinced he can beat Cardenas. Meanwhile, Breslin goes to meet the new confidential informant, who is none other than Mimi, Acosta's American girl. She can get him in touch with Acosta. Breslin gets bagged and brought to Acosta's compound. Acosta is chilling as always and cracks a beer with the agent. He reveals his motivations for taking a meeting.
That's why I'm here. No sé tú, pero para mí lo más importante es la verdad.
Acosta is promised immunity for assistance in the investigation against Felix. Acosta stops short of agreeing but takes his card. Felix meets with a PRI rep and outlines a way to manipulate polls in a way that would reduce Cardena's edge. She takes his data but says if this fails, it's over for him. Later, Felix sends a team led by Caroloni to assassinate Sinaloa player Palma. They don't succeed. The episode ends with Amato warning Acosta he could be next. Acosta says the same for him. Episode 8, Se cayó el sistema, opens with Acosta going on the record, but to the press instead of the feds. It makes front page news, and Breslin goes back to Acosta's house immediately. He's not alone. The FBI is searching the house too. Acosta and Mimi are gone. Meanwhile, Felix tests his poll interference software.
Esta otra. Nos arroja los resultados verdaderos.
The election begins. Pacho of the Cali Cartel calls Felix and says his load of coke is ready. Felix seems caught off guard and ill-prepared. Mimi and Acosta hide out deep in rural Mexico. He wants her to run away on her own so she can avoid the fallout when the cartel comes for him. The election, meanwhile, is rife with voter suppression, producing polls that show the PRI significantly up, discouraging would-be voters from turning out. But the manipulation efforts get discovered.
Es código. Bueno, pues ingrésalo. A ver qué pasa. Ingrésalos. ¡Ándale! ¡Hazlo! No me grites, ¿sí? ¿Qué pasa?
Mr. X tries to explain the discrepancy as a technical problem. Meanwhile, the FBI and Narcos get into a bloody helicopter battle. Breslin tries to lead Mimi to safety. Felix calls Chapo and tries to make amends for the recent hits on Sinaloan men. Chapo says if Palma can return to working without fear for his life, he will assist Felix. Next, Felix calls Benjamin to wrangle him back in, this time with the promise of more cocaine through his plaza. Then, Calderoni moves on Acosta. There's a standoff, but Breslin walks through the line to the home where Acosta is holed up. He offers witness protection and full immunity. Breslin shields Acosta physically.
You are on Mexican soil. You stand down.
What are you gonna do, shoot me?
In the end, it's too late. They fire on Acosta while Breslin ducks out of fire. The Mexican election turns into complete corruption with ballots burned and numbers added. Felix's candidate gets in. For the first time in many episodes, Felix seems on top. Even Maria gets a coffee with him. Episode 9, Growth, Prosperity, and Liberation is an action-packed episode that sets up a sure-to-be explosive finale. We open with a flashback to the good old days. Felix is a cop, growing weed, and close friends with Rafa. How things have changed. The trip down memory lane continues with Felix and Maria touring their hometown. She questions his reasons for being there.
No me vengas con que es por mí.
Me quisieron matar.
Felix's cartel awaits the massive shipment of Colombian coke. If he is able to move it, the Colombians will back him over the other cartels. Next, Breslin gets a call from his brother's wife. She's selling the house and moving on from her husband's death in a way that Wall can't. The DEA decides to sabotage Felix's high-stakes shipment. Amato picks up the shipment from Navigante and it's on. Meanwhile, Felix attends a massive reception, cementing his position among the new political elite. It's cross-cut with the DEA gearing up to stop the shipment and Amato moving the product. As the president speaks, the DEA moves in.
Ay, güey. Acá empezaron estas chingaderas.
One big issue, the product isn't coke. Amato moved the transponder into a different plane and set a trap for the DEA. Breslin and a few others barely make it out. Breslin hangs out hidden for a few minutes to see the culprit behind this plan, Calderoni. He and Walt face off, but Calderoni lets him go. Felix calls Amato. Shipment has been received. Next, Breslin goes to DC and reports on the incident. Orders come from the White House to shut the operation down. Felix heads into the finale on top yet again. The Season 2 finale, Free Trade, has Felix taking stock of his empire. He meets with Chapo and Don Azul. Chapo pleads Palma's case again. Don Azul also advises Felix to consider pardoning Palma. Back in the US comes the biggest bust in drug war history. Felix meets with Pacho, who actually isn't that upset. He's willing to offer Felix another deal, but Felix tries to flex on him.
¿Y tus socios? ¿Qué opinan al respecto?
Yo no tengo socios. Tengo empleados.
Man, that guy is ice cold. Felix also commissions a horrific hit against Palma's family and also hits the Gulf Cartel with an arson attack. Maria, who is giving Felix another chance, is horrified.
A la chingada ya con el pinche güero Palma, ¿ok?
Pero que te vayas de aquí, lárgate de esta casa.
Next comes a meeting with all the Plaza bosses, but the Isabella Arellano Felix siblings receive a call from Pacho. At the cartel meeting, Felix reveals he called in the tip on the warehouse himself to gain an advantage over Colombia. The Arellano Felix siblings pull out of the cartel, as do the Sinaloans. Felix has no patience for any of them. Even Amado wants out, leaving Felix truly alone. Meanwhile, Breslin is working a desk job in the government, and the Arellano Felix siblings decide to buy out Isabella, but she absolutely refuses. Then, the biggest arrest of the season comes, and in characteristic narco style, even a win feels like a setback.
Quedas bajo arresto.
Ya tengo $5 millones esperándolo en la caja fuerte, comandante.
Pues no me interesa.
I guess he pissed too many people off. The US pressure became too much, and the Mexican government moves on Felix for an easy win. Operation Leyenda is declared a success, and Kiki has been avenged. Even Breslin finally gets credit. Meanwhile, Isabella is escorted away by the police. Palma and Chapo get revenge too. A new alliance forms between the cartels of the different regions. They will operate separately under new rules, put the past behind them, respect each other, and prosper. Breslin meets with Felix in prison and reminds him of why this all started.
Tenía familia.
He denies involvement and sets up next season. The cartels will work together until they can't anymore. Alright, Season 3 premiered 12 Steps sets the stage for a new Mexico. This one starts with the plane going down. Amado miraculously survives, and a crew is there to meet him, but they're not alone. Amado escapes in a truck, but it isn't long before the Mexican police catch him. As Amado is carted away, a new voice takes over the narration mic. Andrea Nunez, a journalist reporting on the cartel. She sets the stage for a chaotic new country. 3 months later, Breslin attends a support group. Seems like he's finally dealing with his brother's death. After the therapy session, he meets a man named Mike who fills him in on details of a covert operation they're conducting that night. Breslin is going undercover to bust cocaine dealers. Breslin rolls out with his boys for surveillance. We follow a different car headed in the opposite direction. The new players raid a stash house in an artfully shot scene. The perpetrator is Victor, a corrupt cop out of Juarez. Meanwhile, Amado is released from prison. That night, Breslin discusses with his new girlfriend Danny, but one topic he won't mention is his brother. Amado meets with Aguilar, the boss of Juarez. He's upset about the bust, but Aguilar insists things are going smoothly. Next, we check back in on the new player, Victor. He lives modestly with his wife, who's aware of his dangerous profession. He gets into uniform and heads over to a neighbor's house to receive a report of a missing girl, Teresa. His partner from last night, and as it turns out, his police partner, Rogelio, picks him up. Meanwhile, Amado oversees construction on his new mansion. Who was once a humble pilot is now a drug mogul. Nunez returns on the voiceover mic to fill us in on more of the realities of being a cop in Mexico.
But Jamaicans meet another way. Which means, in a place like Ciudad Juarez, cops don't solve crimes. They commit them.
Back in Texas, Breslin outlines Operation Nissan. They intend on nailing Juarez traffickers entering the US in Nissans. Over in Juarez, Nunez explains another player, Carlos Hank Gonzalez, El Profesor, a former school teacher who ascended the PRI ranks. He explains he will be overseeing Aguilar and Amado's operation in Juarez. Meanwhile, Breslin goes undercover to scope out the trafficking route. He's handed the keys to a big rig full of coke. He tells Mike he's actually a DEA agent and to play it cool. After he gets out, he relays the info he gathered. It's clear the coke smuggling operation is directly connected with Juarez. Amado takes out Aguilar. He's the new boss now. Amado meets with El Profesor and hands him the deeds to the land he was seeking in Juarez. Meanwhile, Victor continues his search for Teresa at a morgue, but she's nowhere to be found. The pieces are set up. Let's see how they fall. Episode 2, Como la Flor, begins with 2 kids in a heavily guarded mansion. The younger kid goes up to his friend who looks like a narco. He says he can get him to a party tonight. Breslin continues his truck surveillance. They intend on stopping some of his trucks, but don't intend on reporting the bust to the press, making the cartel think they have an internal problem in El Paso. If the shipments are interfered with, it will bring Amado to the surface. Next, we meet our narrator, Nunez. She intends to cover the marriage of Enedina Arellano Felix to Claudio Vasquez, and her editor thinks it's too light.
La hermana de un narco prominente, casándose con un abogado de uno de los despachos más antiguos de la ciudad. En la catedral más prestigiosa de Tijuana, Marco, esto no hubiera pasado hace 2 años.
She makes a good case. Next, she explains that the government controls most media in Mexico, but her paper prints its own story independently. Breslin meets with his brother's widow and gets the news that she's going out of town for college. He says she's happy for her, but doesn't seem so. Back in Mexico, Nunez slips through security and into the wedding grounds. It's a beautiful ceremony if you ignore the fact that the bride is complicit in multiple murders. Outside, Nunez smokes a cigarette and strikes up a conversation with some choir girls on a smoke break themselves. She gets the intel on the reception. One of the attendees is El Mayo, a trafficker who operates independently from all the big regional dogs. Nunez also explains how on the Gulf side, the elder Don Juan stepped down for his nephew to take charge. She also mentions that Sinaloa is now at the bottom of the drug smuggling barrel. The priest gives a speech for the newlyweds when he's interrupted.
¡Brindemos, chingao! Por los 20 centímetros que se va a chingar todas las pinches noches el amor.
The culprit is El Rayo, not to be confused with El Mayo, a Sinaloan cartel member. He's escorted out of the wedding, and Nunez tries to get a good look, but security stops her from witnessing his murder. Back in the US, Breslin is introduced to homicide detective who are investigating the murder of the owners of the land the cartel is using to store the product in the US. They storm in, but the building is cleared out. Better luck next time, feds. Nunez observes some high-profile Mexicans arriving at the reception, including a judge. Contrasting with her progress is Walt Breslin, who's incredibly frustrated at the investigation's lack of progress. At the reception, Nunez gets a tip from the bartender about the judge's son, Alex, and Ramon, the two hoodlums we saw at the episode's start. Back in the US, Breslin volunteers to take his brother's widow, Alejandra, to Chicago. Episode 3, Los Juniors, shows the Sinaloans in another bad spot. Since the tax was not paid to Benjamin, their last shipment did not go through. Nunez zooms out and explains a phenomenon where, even in Mexico, the rich kids idealize narco culture. She tries to approach the judge for her story, but is met by his wife instead. Amato has a new approach to the cartel, a cell system.
Instead of viewing his cartel as a whole, he divided it into parts, each fulfilling a different role.
This means if one section goes down, the organization as a whole continues. The Sinaloans visit El Mayo on his fishing boat. They want to work with him to go around Benjamin, but he says no. Nunez gets critical photos for her story, tying the judge to the traffickers explicitly. Her editor wants more evidence on the financial end of this uncovered alliance. Meanwhile, Victor gets approached by the Breslin. He wants Victor to get him more info on Amato, but the cop absolutely refuses. Later, Amato visits our friend Pacho in Cali. Pacho tells him their organization is going to start favoring the Arellano Felix group more, and Amato doesn't take kindly.
La única manera que esos putos se van a quedar con mi cocaína va a ser sobre mi cadáver, Pacho. Mientras no me joda la alfombra, tu cadáver me da igual.
Back in Mexico, another cartel meeting occurs, this one between the Arellano Felixes and Sinaloa, repped by Azul, Chapo, and Palma. Sinaloa wants a more favorable shipping route, but Benjamin will not sell it to them. Amato gets personal with Chapo and opens up about the death of his daughter when he was in prison. Pacho agrees to hook Amato up with the product as long as he can move it all in 1 month. Victor finally finds Teresa. He denies knowing her, and the crime scene doctor claims murdered girls are a regular occurrence. Guess that's what happens when the drug trade infiltrates all aspects of society. Later, at Benjamin's birthday party, a hitman for Sinaloa and Chapo makes a move. Ramon manages to get Benjamin out just in time. This is gonna have some serious repercussions. Episode 4, GDL, opens with a familiar scene from a new perspective. Amato watches TV news coverage of Pablo's death. Stateside, a car accident results in a trafficker's cover being blown as massive amounts of coke explode onto the road. He gets brought in for questioning. Elsewhere, El Mayo is visited by our friend El Azul and Chapo. He's skeptical because of their attempted hit on Benjamin. Mayo says he has their friendship but not his smuggling infrastructure. They make plans to hide out. Amato meets with the big boys of the Cali Cartel.
Y con adaptarse, supongo que vos te referís a hacerte a ti más rico.
Quiero que me paguen con cocaína.
He sees Cali has a target on their back, and through him, they can reduce their exposure. Meanwhile, the Arellano Felix crew plots to take down Chapo. They begin recruiting brutal soldiers fresh out of prison. Then, Nunez presents evidence that Benjamin is laundering his money through a casino. Her editor wants a partial report published. Like the DEA, they will stay on the case and gather enough info until they can nail the big dog, El Profesor. Turns out, El Profesor killed a journalist for the paper previously, and the editor never forgot. Victor tells his partner about the body from the night before. He seems rattled, but his partner dismisses his concern. Dead girls are just part of the job. Later, Amato gets approval from the Cali Cartel. Amato takes a little vacation with the girl he met out. He seems to really like her. Meanwhile, Ramon gets an update on Chapo's movement. He reports it to Benjamin. They plan to take him out tomorrow. Later, Victor questions the morgue about the protocol for newly received bodies. He has to bribe him to write a report. Victor determines multiple girls were killed in the same manner as Teresa, suggesting there's a serial killer on the loose. Chivo, Ramon's friend, has Chapo in his sights and shoots his shot. Oh, better luck next time. The Arellano Felix's forces move in on Chapo, but he's long gone. Even worse, Ramon storms through the airport and starts opening fire recklessly. Of course, it's massive news right away, with countless innocent lives claimed. Both Nunez and Breslin watch eagerly, knowing this will bring them closer to their goals of catching the people on the top. The episode wraps up with Amado getting El Profesor on his side, securing his status as the most powerful drug dealer in Mexico. Episode 5, Boots on the Ground, begins with the fallout of the airport shootout. A cardinal was killed and the Catholic Church wants justice. Only the Sinaloans get named on the TV, Chapo gets a big price on his head. The DEA gets ready to make another move. A briefing introduces General Jesus Hector Rebollo, the Mexican law enforcement rep who will aid the DEA. Benjamin's side handles the church fallout a little differently. Ramon intends to put the two men up as fall guys. Nunez begins questioning witnesses at the airport. Later at the judge's house, Ramon pressures him into taking more and more risks. Back in America, Breslin tells his brother's widow, Danny, he can't transfer to Chicago now and would be gone for a few months. Meanwhile, Victor meets with Teresa's mom and finds out she went missing after she left for work. He can't seem to let this one go. Nunez confronts El Profesor.
Permíteme, Carlitos. A ver, mija. ¿Por qué habría mi aerolínea de ayudar a un criminal?
He doesn't budge at all. Breslin returns to Tijuana and meets with General Rebollo, who seems much harsher and more honest than Calderoni. Back with Nunez, she gets in trouble for talking directly to El Profesor, and his lawyers call the paper immediately. All while Benjamin tries to mend fences with the church itself, but Adina advises him to run. Benjamin meets with the local cardinal, but can tell from a car down the street that the feds are waiting. They spring into action. He escapes and the general calls in orders for law enforcement not to pursue. Breslin consults with the general, who says he needs the Mexican people on his side before they make the big moves. He intends to take out the entire cartel. He also gives some important news. Chapo has been arrested.
Was turned over to Mexican authorities. Sentenced to 20 years for weapons possession, drug trafficking, and involvement in the Cardinal's murder.
The Arellano Felix crew seem more united than ever. Episode 6, La Jefa, checks back in on our boy Amado. It's an average morning in his mansion, while in sharp contrast, Breslin eats the unglamorous DEA cafeteria food. Nunez sets the stage for Mexico's current state. The airport massacre resulted in armed rebellion from a group called Zapatistas. They begin their rebellion the day NAFTA, a North American trade deal, is finalized. Meanwhile, Amado is on top with Sinaloa preoccupied by war. He meets with Pacho, who gives bad news.
Mira, estoy acá porque quería decírtelo personalmente. Mis socios de Cali quieren salirse del negocio.
Amado is now stuck with a big issue. He needs a new supplier. Amayo meets with the Arellano Felix crew and gets word he can't move through their plaza without paying their tax. After he leaves, Enadina reveals she heard the news from Cali too. Meanwhile, Victor inspects the body and identifies it as Teresa. Regillo is ready to move on, but you can tell this case is affecting Victor. Back on the DEA side, Breslin interrogates a new potential source, Alex. He's aware of the law and knows they don't have a warrant and leaves. Breslin still slips him his card. Enadina calls Amado and they start planning for a post-Cali world. Breslin crosses the border and gets stuck in inane traffic. Mexico is in turmoil.
On March 23, 1994, Luis Donaldo Colosio was assassinated at a campaign rally in Tijuana. Questions of who killed him and why would linger.
Nunez determines from a source at the hospital that the PRI killed their own candidate. The problem is, she needs someone to go on the record against El Profesor and no one will talk. Victor rehearses breaking the news to Teresa's mom, and it's so much harder than he thought. Amado meets with the North Valley and gets an exclusive deal from him that deprives the Arellano Felix clan of its supply. Breslin and another agent stake out Alex's house, not long before Ramon explodes out of the gates. Breslin heads into the house while a shootout goes down outside. Breslin takes Narco into custody. Next, Victor calls the DEA, but it reaches another agent instead of Breslin. He clues this agent in on Amado's brother Vicente. He says he can connect the DEA to folks who know him. Later, Victor goes out to a club and comes face to face with Vicente. He offers to assist on his crew. Looks like we got someone else under deep cover. Next, Alex calls Breslin and says Ramon thinks he's rattled and he's in trouble. He sets out to rescue him. Simultaneous attempts on Amado's and El Azul's lives are carried out. El Azul bites the dust. Episode 7, La Voz, opens with a massive news delay for Nunez's publication of the same name. It looks like they're on a big scoop when the reporter almost makes the news themselves. The general meanwhile briefs Breslin and a team of agents on new intelligence on the location of Ramon and Alfredo. Meanwhile, Mayo visits Chapo in prison to see if their partnership offer from earlier this season still stands. Chapo thinks Sinaloa as a trafficking center is dead, but Mayo's got some ideas. Over with Victor, his partner executes a man who Vincente thinks is a snitch, while he and the audience know full well who is talking. Over at La Vaz, the newspaper staff has to censor stories in order to keep printing. Nunez is furious, but her editor wants to protect his staff. Alex and Alfredo get high, with no idea what's coming. They get Alex, but Alfredo escapes. Then Victor meets with the DEA to receive DNA evidence on Teresa's killer in exchange for his cartel info. The bad news is that the sample was inconclusive with no leads. Back with the cartel, El Mayo meets with Amado. He wants a partnership, but Mayo is already with Sinaloa. They decide to squeeze out the Arellano Felixes and leave the management of their plaza to Sinaloa. Later, Breslin checks in with the general and discovers they can only hold his arrest for 48 hours before his lawyers get him out. The DEA's conditions for a prisoner are honestly as bad as the cartel's. El Mayo's plan comes into action to take over Tijuana by flipping the Arellano Felix's men. Ouch. And Andina notices the eerie quiet in her town and begins to get freaked out. Meanwhile, Amado meets with El Profesor, who thinks the assault on Tijuana is too publicly violent for what he originally agreed on. He plans on cutting off Amado's funds if these methods continue. That night, Victor tries to ask some questions to a bus of women going home from the plant where Teresa worked, but they will not cooperate. It looks like a lost cause, but then one of the women speaks up. She says the last time she saw Teresa, she was waiting at a bus stop. Then, a man in an American car picked her up. Seems like this case is heating up. Back with the DEA, they send a Mexican soldier in to interrogate Alex, and his threats are seriously terrifying. Breslin goes to play good cop when Alex drops a bombshell.
California, I have dual citizenship. I'm American.
Breslin recognizes he's violating Alex's civil liberties and demands the general stop, but he doesn't listen. He says get this info now or lose it forever. His torture continues as we cut to the credits. Episode 8, Last Dance, opens with a flashback of Don Nito selling Amado on the idea of unified cartel. He's not alone.
¿Cómo me dijo que se llamaba? Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo.
Ah, the good old days. Now, like Felix before him, Amado is on top yet incredibly isolated. Politically, Mexico is in a bad spot. Their currency loses half its value once they begin to trade with the US dollar. However, the cartel, which deals in American dollars, just got richer. Nunez gets info from a source that ties El Profesor to a cartel slush fund, and she's got hard evidence to back it up. Over at the DEA, the torture of Alex continues. Amado takes another meeting with the Hey-Now, who says they are going to hit Pacho because they don't trust that he won't talk to the government while doing time. Meanwhile, Victor continues his investigation. Over the Chapo, he begins running Sinaloa from behind bars. And with El Mayo's support, business is a-boomin'. He hangs out with Don Nito, who gives him props. Things aren't so great with Andina. Their entire operation has been squeezed out. Over with Breslin, he has a one-on-one with Alex to get him to talk. He uses his personal experience of a brother gone too soon.
And if you don't take it, you're gonna be spending the rest of your life wishing that you had.
Next, Nunez gives us another political history lesson. After the peso collapsed, the former president's brother was arrested for the murder of the PRI Secretary General. Then, the president flees to Ireland before his family can be prosecuted. Meanwhile, Victor's partner says the cartel is beginning to become uneasy. Amado calls Pacho and they have a bit of a heart-to-heart. It seems like Amado might tip him off, but he never does. Over at La Vaz, Nunez's editor announces advertisers are pulling out and the business is going under. Breslin, meanwhile, thinks he has Alfredo's location.
Chingue su madre. Se hizo justicia.
Yikes, Alfredo wasn't there. Victor works as a cartel bouncer and gets into a fight. The tension continues at home with his wife the next day. Breslin checks back in with Alex and gets his alliance to finally locate Alfredo. Nunez gets a lead on the bank that's holding the cartel's slush fund. Amado starts making plans to run away. He calls his mistress we met earlier and invites her to accompany him. She accepts, but in this business, can you ever really get away? Episode 9, The Reckoning, opens with a horrifying lynching. The Arellano Felix clan is sending El Mayo a message. Stay out of Tijuana or you're next. Later, Palma finally gets nabbed by the cops and joins his boys El Chapo and Nito in prison. Elsewhere, Victor gets caught going through Vincente's truck. He lets it slide but is incredibly suspicious. On the DEA side, Breslin plays Alex tapes of phone calls to identify cartel members, but Alex says their intelligence is all wrong. At La Vaz, Nunez ties the cartel's money to a former beauty queen. They think she's the one withdrawing the money from the cartel without raising suspicions. El Profesor exerts control over Amado by threatening his new girlfriend. Meanwhile, Victor executes another man on the cartel's behalf. At the DEA, they tap Benjamin's phones and receive intel that his daughter is sick. Breslin intends to find Benjamin's location by picking up a special clinic that will treat his daughter's rare illness. In prison, Nito advises Chapo to potentially take out Palma as his influence is growing too much. Victor meets with his DEA contact, but he's still not getting the info to make his ratting worth it. Amado calls his girlfriend Isabella and tells her she can't come with him now. Back in prison, the Sinaloans start to make plans to move product without Amado's involvement. Nunez ties the ex-beauty queen to El Profesor. Meanwhile, Isabella goes to escape and is saved by Amado's men just in the nick of time.
¿Por qué no sube al auto y no viene con nosotros?
Amado initiates a plan to pay off El Profesor and flee. The DEA finally moves on Benjamin, but he's not home. Then, Nunez connects General Rebollo to the cartel's money laundering scheme. Yep, like call it running before him, he's corrupt. The editorial staff decides to start questioning members of the Mexican army. Victor goes to the bus stop where Teresa disappeared, but again, all the women are skeptical of talking. He warns them about the killer and drives off. Benjamin gets word on the raid of his house and is devastated, but not much he can do except keep hiding out. Breslin gets a shocking call that the general is about to be arrested. Victor finally comes clean to his wife about the investigation. She is extremely concerned for his safety. Later, Breslin arrives on the scene of Rebollo's arrest. Rebollo says he did what he had to. Breslin does not accept that and escorts Alex out. On Amado's way out, he gets word of the general's arrest and knows he's next. We've now seen empires rise, fall, and reunite, but all things must end. And this is the finale of not only Narcos Mexico, but the entire Narcos universe. We begin with the fallout of Rebollo's arrest. It comes as a shock to the entire world. Victor follows a car that picks up women near the bus stop. Over in San Diego, Breslin hides out with Alex. He meets with another agent who said immunity for Alex isn't guaranteed quite yet. In prison, Chapo is in a tight spot. Neither Amado nor El Mayo is supplying product. Palma wants Sinaloa to cut their losses and move on from Tijuana. Chapo agrees, but we know it's all a show. Once Palma is out of earshot, Chapo confirms from a guard that Palma will be transferred to another prison, which will sideline him from running the Sinaloa cartel. With the other cartels in turmoil, the Arellano Felix family finally has a leg up. Amado is on the move again when the Lord of the Skies tries to escape in a plane. But the assassins disable it. He manages to get in the vehicle and drive away. His men aren't so lucky. Back in the US, Breslin prepares Alex for testimony and he starts planning to return to Mexico. Breslin gives the kid a dose of reality. If he informs, he can never go home. At Lavos, Nunez can get access to the general, but they intend on publishing stories on the Arellano Felix siblings. Amado makes plans to flee to Chile and intends to bring Isabella. Later, Victor pulls over the man who abducted the latest woman worker. He makes the man open his shirt, and sure enough, it reveals a defensive wound. Victor doesn't hesitate. Over in America, Breslin gets word that Alex's immunity can't get approved. Victor gets a word from Rogelio that he needs him for a job tonight. Victor's wife is understandably worried. Over with Chapo, Palma's prison transfer is in motion, but that's not all. Chapo also initiated a transfer for Don Nito, leaving himself in total control of Sinaloa. Meanwhile, Victor stumbles on a discovery of a mass grave of dead women, including one from the previous night. This is, unfortunately, a regular occurrence in Mexico. Breslin returns to Alex's room to find the door wide open and the witness gone. That is not going to be good. He gets a call that Alex was found. Oh man, that's brutal. Nunez meets with a DEA source who's none other than Breslin. He reveals the civil rights violations the DEA committed during Alex's interview. Meanwhile, Victor feels intense guilt over the fact that he can't stop the repeated killings of girls in Mexico. He stopped one man, but not the system. Meanwhile, Lavos' editor is gunned down, part of an epidemic of journalists killed. Victor is led to a secluded spot by his partner and confronted about how long he worked with the DEA. He doesn't stand down and is executed. Amado then dies anticlimactically in a heart surgery, leaving Isabella stranded in Chile. Meanwhile, Ramon gets pulled over and killed unglamorously in a police shooting, orchestrated by El Mayo. Next, Chapo meets with Mayo in prison, and the Mexican drug trade power ends where it started, Sinaloa. Rislin is back where he started this season too, making undercover busts. The war continues. Even though the series stops there, a lot has happened to its participants since. Chapo escaped prison and was recaptured multiple times, and El Mayo dodged arrest all the way up until 2024. So what do we think? Is the series due for an update? See you guys next time.